Welcome back to the PFF NFL show. It is Friday of free agency week, which means it's time to give out some free agency grades. Trevor, Sikkema, Dalton, Wasserman back here with you guys once again. Dalton, we have been live every single day this week recapping what's been happening through the tampering period once the new league year became official, and now we are here at the tail end of things. It's not that teams can't still sign players. There's still some good players out there that I think are going to make up for some role-playing positions, some depth pieces, the core of the rosters. We'll still get some guys who will be signing, and here in this show, if we have news breaks, we'll break into it and we'll talk about it. But for the most part, a lot of the big splashes are done, and especially when it comes to how teams navigated free agency when it comes to the NFL draft. I think we've got a pretty good idea of where these rosters are going to be. So we're giving out some grades. You ready for it? I got my glasses on because I'm trying to be astute here on this show for the grading. I don't know, I'm just trying to play the part. Make sure that we're appropriate for what we're doing here today. But how you feeling, buddy?
Oh, I'm good. I'm sure even with my glasses, I wouldn't even be capable of being astute, but that's okay. We'll figure it out anyway. No, it's good to get a bow tied on all 32 teams, right? And I think that's the fun part is getting into that draft needs part, right? Getting into what is left for these teams to fill in, what gaps are remaining, and how can they attack that in the draft. That's going to be fun to break down both today and for the next 6 weeks.
Yeah. We're going to have, really over the next couple of weeks, I know we'll go through in depth and we'll comb through the team needs that'll be changed in the mock draft simulator, which, just for everybody who's watching and listening, we should be doing that this afternoon. So all those team needs post-free agency should be updated for you. We have the official draft order as well, so we'll get that into the mock draft simulator. So over the next 6 weeks, you can just have the best mock draft experience possible over at the PFF mock draft simulator. We're going to do all 32 teams. So with that, anytime we're keeping tabs or doing something on all 32 teams, we know it's going to be a beast of an episode. So let's kick it off with the AFC East and the Buffalo Bills, which get our first A of the day. So from the PFF staff, which is sort of a collective, you and I were in on this staff. There might be a little bit of a disagreement here and there, and so I'd like to sort of discuss that. If you see a grade that the staff gave out that you go, man, I would have been way higher, way lower on this, love to have those conversations here with you. But the Buffalo Bills get an A-, and we kind of recap what the Buffalo Bills have done this week. Joey Bosa was sort of the headline name that they brought in, but we love the Michael Hoyt deal as well. Larry Ogunjobi, these guys are just new defensive line pieces that we saw they needed a lot of change on their defensive line, and because of that, we often mocked them a defensive lineman in the first round quite a bit. They can still do that, but it's not as dire of a need now. They also brought in Josh Palmer, Derek Forrest, Laviska Shenault was an ad from them yesterday. Made a lot of re-signings and extensions as well. A- here for the Buffalo Bills. Do you agree with it? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm good with that. I think, again, adding that defensive line depth with some veterans is a really big move for them, especially a team that struggled so much in run defense and down the middle. And I think on the edge, Michael Hoyt's really going to help them on early downs. I like the Josh Palmer signing. I think it is a direct upgrade to Matt Collins if Palmer is healthy for the entire season. Plus, he's 6 years younger. And the more I look at this Greg Rousseau extension as well, I want to throw that out there. 4 years and $80 million. When we see what some of the big-name edge defenders are getting. I mean, obviously we think about Myles Garrett recently, what Micah Parsons is going to get. Rousseau's not on the level of those guys, but I think I could argue him into the second tier of edge defenders, and they extended him for only $20 million a year. I think as he keeps progressing and as he keeps developing, he's still very young, and he was really good this past year. I would argue their best defensive player. I think that's going to become a bargain for them very, very soon.
Yeah, they lost a lot of what was like their older core, I think, last year, and I was very skeptical on how the Bills were going to be this past season. They end up being, once again, one of the best teams in the NFL, competing for an AFC championship and a deep Super Bowl run. And honestly, I love their offseason even more now. So if they were able to navigate a lot of the losses and a lot of the turnover they had last year, you got to love the moves that they made this year. And if you had faith in Buffalo last year, again, you got to have even more faith in them this year. So I'm not going to say that the Kansas City Chiefs are going to go away, but maybe that's a hump that they really feel like they can get over at this point in time. Watching what the Philadelphia Eagles did to Kansas City in the Super Bowl, I wonder if the rest of the league sort of looks at this situation and goes, hey, not that Mahomes and the Andy Reid era is done in Kansas City by any means, but I think that a lot of those top-tier teams maybe don't look at the Chiefs and have that mental warfare in their head. Because I said this after they beat Baltimore, they beat Buffalo. Like, the Chiefs, they beat you mentally. before the ball is even kicked off. And I wonder if just what happened in the Super Bowl, I wonder if that's not nearly as much of a factor anymore in these teams in the AFC that continue to get better. Maybe that race is more wide open than it has been over the last couple of years with the Chiefs dominating and coming out on top in the AFC. So Buffalo, I thought, did a great job with a lot of their needs. I totally agree with the A- as well. Yeah, the only thing for me is maybe on the offensive side of the ball, they could have done a little bit more, but I actually really like just the way that they navigated things, taking care of their own, bringing in the right guys along the defensive line. Corner as well, sort of, you're not really doing anything at the cornerback position. You're moving on from Kyrie Elam, which I think was an addition by subtraction, but A- I'm very comfortable with. I like A- there for the Buffalo Bills. The New England Patriots are the next team in this division. We gave them a B+ here. So when we look at what the New England Patriots were able to do this offseason, they had the most cap space to spend of any team in the NFL, and they made good use of it. Milton Williams, Carlton Davis, Harold Landry, Robert Spillane, Kayvon Chason as well. I'll throw him in there on the offensive side of the football. All right, maybe not huge splashes, but they bring in Morgan Moses, that veteran presence along the offensive line. They brought in Mac Hollins as well, who, showcased some clutch ability there in the playoffs with the Buffalo Bills. So we gave him a B+ here. A lot of moves for them to make. I think they still have a good chunk of change in free agency left, so they might not be done. And there's a handful of really nice receivers that are still out there. Veteran receivers who are, maybe a little bit past their prime, and like Amari Cooper and Stephon Diggs. But shoot, you had one of those guys, and I think that this would turn into an A, just given how many roster holes that they had and how good the team looks now. What do you think about the Patriots and the moves that they made, and specifically the fact that they prioritized defense as much as they did?
Yeah, I think part of it is that they didn't quite, execute a trade or a signing of any of the big name wide receivers. But when you look at the way that Mike Vrabel wants to build the culture of this team, he wants a really good defense, right? He had a really good defense in Tennessee. They were a physical football team, and that's how they won on both sides of the ball. So that's the route he took, right? Play complementary football, get stops, and you look at all three levels of this Patriots defense. Right now, it looks like they have good units on the D-line, at linebacker, in the secondary. So he's going to try to slow play it. He's going to have a better defense and build the offense with young players through the draft. So I think even with the cap space remaining, and maybe they sign another veteran receiver, I think it's much more forward thinking as far as what we start to look at with their draft being the way that's going to be structured, right? At receiver, at left tackle, now at center as well with David Andrews being released. I think at running back, they could use some speed, some talent back there. So now it really becomes about, in this draft, building around Drake May, getting young pieces that complement what could be a very, very good defense as long as they're put in decent positions by the offense and not too many 3-and-outs and things like that like last year. But you mentioned it. This defense, I think, looks really good, especially with the veterans that they've added.
I think we'll have this conversation plenty, but just right off the top of your head, do you feel like they're pigeonholed into offensive line at number 4? Or at least with their first pick, right? It doesn't have to be at number 4. They could trade back with one of those teams. We sort of explored the scenario of like, man, what if Abdul Carter is still on the board at number 4? I think teams like the Carolina Panthers and the Chicago Bears should be calling to trade up. If you do that in your New England, you might be able to trade back and still get a Will Campbell, an Armand Membu, somebody like that. So do you think that they're just going to target offensive line primarily in that with that first pick, no matter what?
No, I think it very well could be a receiver if they feel that Travis Hunter is a receiver and he's sitting there, or Teteroa McMillan from Arizona. I think either one of those would make sense, and then they could build the offensive line further in day 2. But those are two premier talents at receiver that I think it would be hard for them to pass up as well.
Speaking of receiver, I think this is a decent conversation. I want to sort of go back and forth with the chat as we are doing these grades, but Sean's asking, because we're talking about Teteroa McMillan, right? If the Patriots are going to take a wide receiver at the top, it's probably going to be Tet. Sean's asking, what does Tet do better than Matthew Golden? Somebody tell me. He's 5 inches taller. He's 30 pounds bigger. He's got longer arms. He is an X type of a wide receiver. When you look at Matthew Golden, like, I think he could play on the line of scrimmage. I think he can get off press. Don't get me wrong. But he is more of a Z type of off the line of scrimmage. You can move him around before the snap type of a wide receiver. You could play him in the X spot, but I look at these guys as a little bit different receivers anyways, and I gravitate towards what Ted is because I think he moves very smoothly for a player of his size. He's phenomenal at the catch point. I know Matthew Golden had a really good contested catch percentage as well. Matthew Golden's a little bit better at separating when he's getting in and out of his breaks with his routes, but again, he's 5 inches shorter and he's 30 pounds lighter. So you want him to do that anyways. I talked about this in the Discord. If you guys weren't in the Discord last night, we had a really fun Q&A, and there was one question about like, hey, how do you parse what happens at the combine versus what you've seen on film? What's the weight of really how you are judging these guys in what happens at the combine versus, how much of that percentage changes what you saw on film? And I always tell people the combine is supposed to supplement what you saw on the football field. You're not winning and losing games by not wearing any pads and running a 40-yard dash. What you're doing is you're trying to quantify and measure athleticism that you then bring to the football field. So all of those, if a guy is super explosive on tape, guess what? You want to see him be super explosive at the combine. If he's not super explosive on tape and then he is explosive at the combine, you kind of have to go back to the tape and see, do I see flashes of this? Is this something that I see in their game that I can get more out of? Because remember Jordan Wilkins? Jordan Wilkins had an insane combine. But when you looked at the agility, the explosiveness drills, like all of that, you go, you don't really play like this. You don't win that way when the helmet and the pads come on. And that ended up sort of being the case throughout his NFL career. When you look at Matthew Golden, I think Matthew Golden is a really good receiver. I want to make that very clear. I still think he is somebody that you could take in the first round and he would be fantastic for you at his best. He reminds me of a player like Stephon Diggs, but he reminds me of a player like Stephon Diggs because I didn't expect to see that 4.29 40-yard dash. I didn't see him play with that play speed. Stephon Diggs is somebody who ran a little bit closer to the 4.5s, and he doesn't need that deep speed or that top speed to necessarily beat you. He's so great in his routes. He's so great getting off the line of scrimmage. He's good in contested catch situations. So he reminded me of Stephon Diggs because of that. And after his combine, I went back and I watched another game of Matthew Golden, and I was like, does he play faster than I had originally thought? And the answer that I came away with was no. So even though he ran that 4.29 40-yard dash, he doesn't play like a Xavier Worthy, like a blazing wide receiver. And that's okay. It just doesn't translate as much as you might think. Some guys' athletic testing scores translate to their game more than others. So getting back to the original question, what does Matthew Golden do better than Tetairoa McMillan? I think they are different receivers, and you sort of have to look at how you would use them in the offense a little bit differently. But I like Tet better again, just because I think of how smooth of a mover and a natural athlete, that playmaker mentality after the catch, even though he's not a blazer when it comes to his long speed, all of that paired with him being big, tall, and an alpha when it comes to the ball being in the air. That is just what I like better than Tetairoa McMillan. So that is sort of what I would answer to that question at the very top. I think Sean also asked me that on Twitter, and I hadn't responded to it yet, so I figured that I would get to it here as we were talking about the New England Patriots. Any thoughts there, Dalton? I know I just threw a lot randomly at you. You have any thoughts on that? Or are we going to the New York Jets next?
No, I think just in short, there are less guys at 6'5" who can do what Tetairoa McMillan does than there are guys at 6'1" that can do what Matthew Golden does, right? We can find a bunch of receivers in the NFL at 6'1" who are very, very good route runners, and Golden is that. And to me, more so than the top end speed, it's his ability to stop and start. It's an instant, the top of his route breaks, and his ability to accelerate and decelerate in and out of his routes is excellent. But Tet being such a unique player at 6'5" and all the things he can do, especially like you mentioned, adding that after the catch ability, that's what makes him so unique and arguably the best receiver in this draft.
Yeah, and Sean says in the chat, I thought that he played faster than Diggs. So I think this sort of comes to how the evaluator is evaluating the player. If you and we're all different in this regard. That's how I viewed Matthew Golden. If you view Matthew Golden as somebody who does play with more juice, closer to consistently what we saw from that 4.29 40-yard dash, then absolutely. I know Daniel Jeremiah over at NFL Network talks about Matthew Golden as if he could be the wide receiver one in this class. I can't remember if in his latest rankings he had Golden as his wide receiver one, but this conversation isn't crazy. I'm not calling you super crazy for bringing up this question. That's just how I would answer it. I would agree with Dalton. What Tetairoa McMillan is doing at a bigger size, especially when it comes to some of the fluidity and the after catch mentality from him, when you throw in the fact that he is already a fantastic X receiver and somebody who can win with a lot of size. It's just a player that doesn't come around very often that I gravitate towards a little bit more than Golden. But two very good receivers, guys that I think could be fantastic NFL players in the right systems, no doubt about it. Let's talk about the New York Jets next. So they signed Justin Fields, signed Brandon Stevens as well, signed Andre Sisco, Josh Myers. Rashard Weaver as well, re-signed Jamie Sherwood, which I think was pretty big for them. Now, they don't have C.J. Mosley. They don't have DJ Reed. They don't have Aaron Rodgers. They do not have Devontae Adams. Oh, they also signed Chuck Okorafor and Isaiah Oliver as well. I'll shout them out. Ultimately, staff gave them a B-. Dalton, this is a team near and dear to your heart. Sometimes I feel like you're a harsher critic on the Jets than you need to be just because they've caused you a little bit of pain over the last, 10 years when you watched the football team. But hey, you had the AFC Championships runs with the Sanchez back when he was the quarterback. All right, B- for the New York Jets. What do you think here?
Yeah, I think there's certain signings here. You look at one-year guys like Andre Cisco, even a 2-year contract like Justin Fields, where it just it feels like they're trying to use 2025 as a team-building year, right? I think re-signing Jamie and Sherwood was a really good move. He came on last year, and it's really just going to be a direct replacement for Mosley, and that was the case last year with Mosley having some injuries. So you have Sherwood and Quincy Williams at linebacker there as one of the better linebacker duos in the league. But I think 2025 really is, very similar. It won't be quite as bad record-wise, but it's going to be similar to that first year that Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn and them went through in Detroit, right, where it was, look, the wins and loss total is not going to matter all that much. We're trying to reset the culture here. We're trying to figure out who the long-term pieces are here are, right? So if that happens to be Justin Fields, then he'll get a second contract out of them. I don't believe that to be the case. I think they're going to use either this year's draft or next year's to find their long-term quarterback. But I think the idea behind this is that they're still going to be a somewhat functional football team for as much as the Jets can be, usually. But I think that's it, is you're just trying to find who are the foundational pieces, right? Are they still, within this team? Obviously, guys like Garrett Wilson and Sauce Gardner, who they're probably going to look to extend here pretty soon, and that was the reason they didn't have, any big blowout moves in free agency. So I think it's really going to be about that. I think, people are going to ask, well, how many games can they win with Justin Fields and whatever draft they have and all of that? I don't think that's what 2025 is about. I think Aaron Glenn is taking a long-term approach on this and trying to build a sustainable winner in the same way they did in Detroit.
Yeah, I agree. And in the chat, Jeremy's saying, "Hey, Tet maybe to the New York Jets." I think it's on the table for them potentially at number 7 overall. I like a lot of the moves that they made as long as they are the right culture moves. Right? When we look back at when Dan Campbell took over the Detroit Lions, I feel as though Aaron Glenn is going to try to operate in that same timeline where they're just going to build it slowly, but they're going to try to build it the right way. Now, the Lions were able to show steady progress, I feel like, consistently, so it was easy to buy into that. The tough part is when you have guys who have really good vision, long-term vision, but they go, okay, the first year was a little bit better than the previous year. We like it. And then there's a dip for whatever reason. Starting quarterback gets hurt. They just hit the injury bug throughout the team. Maybe 1 or 2 of their signings, they weren't exactly what they needed to be. And it's when that dip happens, maybe after 1 or 2 years of ascending, that all of a sudden you start to question. You start to question the vision. Okay, now is this guy the guy? Did they have the right long-term approach for this team? And so it gets a little tricky. I feel as though the success stories for franchises like what we have seen from the Detroit Lions, the actual success stories that we get to talk about versus the guys who may have had the exact same correct assessment and vision for the team are it's much more numerous that you have guys who have the correct vision that don't end up achieving that success because of things that might be outside of their control. So I just hope that Aaron Glenn gets the right resources and the long enough leash to go through some ups and downs as he is building this roster the right way, because I do really love what I've heard from him so far. And I would love for the Jets to continue to invest in him in this 2-3 year plan before they really assess what's going on there. But it felt like a culture building New York Jets offseason there, so I can understand the B grade there for the B-, excuse me. Miami Dolphins, I believe we gave him a C+. Yes, Miami Dolphins got a C+ here from the PFF staff. They signed James Daniels, signed Zach Wilson, Terrell Dodson, Ifeatu Melifonwu, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. Love that one, I'm not going to lie. KJ Britt, that was a little bit of a one in, one out with Anthony Walker, who actually goes to Tampa Bay, so a little bit of a flop with the linebackers there. Alexander Mattison that they brought in. Re-signed Quentin Bell, re-signed Elijah Campbell. Liam Eichenberg is also back. D. Eskridge is back. They released Raheem Mostert, so that's how that running back spot became available where they went after Madison. C+ here for the Miami Dolphins. Didn't have a ton of money to start things out, but is C+ harsh given sort of the ceiling being a little bit lower of what this team was going to do, or What do you think about the Dolphins' moves?
No, I think it is indicative of a team that didn't have that many resources to work with, right? And I think the James Daniels signing obviously being their biggest one, that's a crucial one to have him probably come in there at left guard, assuming he's healthy coming off a torn Achilles last year. That would help their offensive line out a lot, I think, an offensive line that has some issues, and I think we both think they're going to attack the left tackle spot in this draft. But no, I mean, there's some value signings in here. I really like Terrell Dodson as a coverage linebacker. Melifone was a good player back there at safety, and Ashton Davis as well. Bring some speed to that back end. Westbrook Akine, I know is somebody that you like as a compliment to Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, but you just don't see a whole lot of impact here, and that's because they didn't have the resources. And you look at the last couple of off seasons with the way the Dolphins roster has been kind of top heavy, and now they're getting into Tua's extension. They're going to have to fill this team out through the draft. Okay, I think they haven't had the best drafts the last couple of years. They really need to hammer this draft, especially in the trenches and in the secondary as well. Losing Javon Holland, right? Cutting Kendall Fuller. They had a secondary that struggled last year. They have to replace a lot of pieces in. They have an offensive line that they're trying to patch together, especially in pass protection. So there's a long way to go, and I think this is a very big year for Mike McDaniel, for Tua Tagovailoa, for this Dolphins franchise to kind of get back on the horse and into playoff contention, or we could see some changes, I think. I think you're really talking about a team that's been slowly eroding, right? Especially on the defensive side. Calais Campbell's gone. Sure. Christian Wilkins left last year. They have a lot of ground to make up, I think, especially if they're still trying to catch Buffalo.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. This is a massive year for Miami and just the current plan that they have, right? It felt like they went very all in with the team speed and getting Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and obviously just like building around Tua's skill sets and sort of the injuries that he has faced, some depleting offensive line, or really neglecting that, I think, within the team building strategy. It's been tough for this team, and I think that they've got some good players. They've been unfortunately bit by the injury bug with some key positions, not just Tua, but also Jalen Phillips and Bradley Chubb and guys like that, and I don't want to shy away from those truths, but I could have gone with a B- here for the Miami Dolphins, given the fact that they just didn't have a lot to work with. And I do like that they brought in James Daniels. I do like some of the one-year deals that they were able to bring into, I think, supplement more of the core of the team, the depth of the team. I feel like the floor for the Miami Dolphins. Because remember how the year started last year? It was like, man, a couple of guys aren't in the lineup. Obviously, Tua not being in the lineup is a big deal. But like even beyond that, man, a couple of guys here and there, Miami looked like one of the worst teams in the NFL. The floor has got to be so much higher for this roster, and I at least think it's a little bit higher this year, knowing that they weren't going to be able to make those big splashes in free agency. At least you raise the floor a little bit. So, it's a C plus for this team. I could have gone with a B- given the expectations of the limited funds that they have, but I can understand that as well because it was a little bit more of a quiet period. And James Daniels and how he pans out is going to be a big telltale sign of how we look back in this free agency period with Miami and talk about how impactful it could have been. Let's flip over to the NFC East now. Talk about the Washington Commanders. They are the top graded team that we had from this free agency period. We gave them an A- here. And really, Dalton, is the only thing that's holding them back from a straight A just the Javon Kinlaw contract being way higher than we thought that it was going to be, because there's so many other moves that I really liked for this team. I think Jonathan Jones and Dietrich Wise over from the Patriots coming over, I think those are really solid players to add. They brought in Eddie Goldman as well. They traded for Laramie Tunsil and Deebo Samuel. They re-signed a ton of their guys from last year, which is a good thing given how well this team played and the chemistry they had. They re-signed Bobby Wagner, Marcus Mariota, Zach Ertz, Noah Brown, Tress Way, Sheldon Day, Jeremy McNichols, Noah Igbenogany, John Bates, Zane Gonzalez, so many players who were on the team last year. They released John Allen, but they made a lot of moves on the defensive line, I think, to try to mitigate that. Javon Kinlaw being one of them. He's got that Adam Peters connection that you talked about. Peters was in San Francisco when they drafted him in the first round. So you've been talking about it all week. Connections are important when it comes to saying who these players are going to sign with. What do we think about the Commanders? Again, going back to the top of how I started this conversation, is the Javon Kinlaw contract basically all that's holding them back from a straight A kind of a grade? Because I love what they've done.
Pretty much, yeah. It's an overpay for a player who has struggled throughout his entire career. And again, I know the connections, but Javon Kinlaw is certainly not the guy that I thought was going to get $15 million a year this offseason. And last year played for the Jets on a little over $7 million. And didn't perform that far outside of his career norms. I think his grade, again, in the low to mid-50s. I'm not really sure where 3 years and $45 million became the number for him, but that's really the only thing holding him back from a solid A, because you you got a left tackle that's one of the best in football in Laramie Tunsil after a year after finishing 22nd in pass blocking grade. You got Deebo Samuel for, what was it, a 5th-round pick? I mean, that's a weapon you add to your offense. A relatively conservative passing game last year that relied on a lot on yards after the catch. I think Deebo fits in perfectly. And then I think two guys that stand out to me, Bobby Wagner and Zach Ertz, not only are they still talented players at an older age, but two leaders on that team, right? I think especially Wagner on defense. There was times where he was really the glue that's holding that whole thing together, right? And he's still one of the best in the league, especially in run defense. So they do need to build around those guys, certainly around Wagner on defense, but you have to like just about everything else that Washington did outside of that Kinlaw contract.
Yeah, and they kind of needed a big splash there because they've only got 5 picks in this upcoming draft. They got their 1st-round pick, their 2nd-round pick, and then they don't pick again until the 4th round. Then they have a 6th-round pick, don't have anything in the 5th round. So nothing in the 3rd round, nothing in the 5th round there for the Commanders, who obviously traded those selections for Laramie Tunsil. So you made your moves. This is kind of what we have here, and now it's up to Adam Peters to sort of nail the draft with a smaller draft class than anticipated. So I wonder if this is the last year where Washington's going like all in on free agency. You had a lot of turnover last year with the new regime. You really had a lot of turnover again with this. So a lot of the chips are on the table, and they're doing what they need to do, continuing to put the pedal to the floor given what Jaden Daniels has been for them this season. But I wonder if it's just going to be, hey, we're focusing on the draft next year and the year after to make sure that we have the right health within our cap ecosystem, if you will, because you can't just be signing a ton of veterans every single year. You'll get way too cap heavy and too cap inflated. You need those rookie contracts in there. So now that they've done a lot in free agency over the last 2 years, I think we'll see them turn their attention more towards the NFL draft. The New York Giants get a B-. Giants here still without a quarterback, and I think that it's tough to give them anything higher than a B- because it's not without trying, right? They were in the conversation for Matthew Stafford. I don't know if they were officially in the conversation for Geno Smith, but they've been looking for an upgraded quarterback. They've been trying to find one this offseason. We know that last offseason they put in a big trade to the New England Patriots to try to get the number 3 overall to draft Drake May, but ultimately, without a quarterback, it's hard to give them much more than a B-. But I do like some of the moves that they have made, right? I like the Paulson and Debo edition. I like the Javon Holland edition. Both of those players, I think, really complement who they already had in their secondary, and it attacks one of their biggest weaknesses, because this was one of the worst secondaries, lowest graded secondaries, I should say, in the NFL last year. Added James Hudson, added Chauncey Golson, Roy Robertson Harris as well. So you got a handful of defensive linemen, or just trench players overall. They re-signed Darius Slayton, brought back Tommy DeVito, which is nice because I don't think they have another quarterback on the roster outside of Tommy DeVito right now. But New York Giants get me a B-. What did you think of this?
Yeah, no, I think the headline is that they improved their secondary, right? They filled that out. Now you've got a 5-man starting secondary, all with players that are going to be 26 years old or younger come the start of the season. Also re-signed Darius Slayton, so you're looking at a solid 3 of Malik Neighbors, Slayton, and Wan'Dale Robinson on offense. I think the questions for me, you mentioned the quarterback part of it, and then the offensive line. I mean, I think, they signed a couple of players in Stone Forsythe and James Hudson who really profile more as backups. That would be another big question to me. I don't think we've talked about enough is what they're doing at right tackle, because I just don't think, especially with his pass protection, I don't think they can start Evan Neal at right tackle in the coming season. I think they have to find another solution. They didn't do it in free agency, at least not yet, and I have to wonder if that's going to be a focus area in the draft come probably round 2 or 3 when they're looking at the offensive line class, the second tier of that class.
Yeah, I agree, and it puts a lot of pressure. Again, we talked about free agency. It's not just about the players that you bring in. It's also about how you are building just an overall offseason strategy. And again, I feel bad for the Giants because they have taken big swings at the quarterback position, but now we're sitting here, we go, okay, well, I like the players that you brought in. I like some of the strategy that you had here, but what they have done over the last 3 months in no way, shape, or form makes the NFL draft even any easier for them. They're sitting at number 3 overall. It sure feels like the Titans are going to take Cam Ward at number 1. You comfortable enough taking Shedeur Sanders at number 3? You comfortable with any of these other quarterbacks in this class being able to start for you next season in a make-or-break hot seat year for you? So it's just tough for the Giants. I am fascinated to see how they are going to still remain aggressive and try to get the quarterback that could really help out here. Maybe it's a Russell Wilson, who we know was reported to visit with them. Maybe they feel a little bit better about that if they could bring him in. But a B- for the New York Giants. Wonder if people think that that's a little harsh or not. Or maybe we're too lenient without a quarterback. Maybe people think that it should be worse. Philadelphia Eagles also got a B-. Signed Josh Uche, that 1-year deal, which is hilarious because Howie Roseman added 4 void years on a $2 million total contract. Howie, you're just an absolute demon at the cap, my friend. That's just incredible work. Signed Adoree Jackson, signed A.J. Dillon. We knew it wasn't going to be super loud free agency period for the Philadelphia Eagles bringing guys in from outside the roster. They just won a Super Bowl. So they're going to try to contain as many as the guys that they had on that roster. They lose Milton Williams. They lose Josh Sweat. But they bring back Zach Bond, which I think was really important. Obviously, they had the extension to Saquon Barkley. Traded away Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Released Darius Slay and James Bradbury. We knew that this was going to be a tough offseason for the Philadelphia Eagles to navigate. Ultimately, we gave them a B- here on staff. Was that fair? What do you think about the Eagles getting a B- here?
Yeah, I mean, the big one is re-signing Zach Bond, and I'm looking a little bit more into this now, but I think Adoree Jackson is going to be very quietly a signing that helps them a lot, right? They lost Darius Slay, and they lost Isaiah Rodgers, who could have been a young replacement for him. He went to Minnesota. So I look at somebody like Adoree Jackson, and I think about the fit. Even this past year, he's not thought of as the flashiest player, obviously a former first-round pick, but hasn't always panned out. But this past year, there's one number I look at, an 82.6 zone coverage grade for Adoree Jackson this past year, and that's pretty much all Vic Fangio runs for the most part. Sometimes we'll get into a cover 1 look if he wants to blitz, but not that often. It's mostly cover 4, cover 6 in that defense. I think Jackson is someone who could go in there and start if they don't find a younger solution in the draft to put ahead of him. But I think that's an underrated addition considering they lost Slay and they lost Rodgers. Put him across from Quinyon Mitchell, leave Cooper DeJean in the slot, and you still have this secondary that's going to be really good next year.
I mean, and the team is just, it's built to sustain off seasons like this where you know that there's just going to be some years where there's nothing you could do about it. Would they have loved to bring Josh Sweat and Milton Williams back? Of course. But there's, as much as we say that the salary cap is fake, it's not totally fake. You do have to operate in the rules, even Howie Roseman, who seems to be a wizard with the salary cap. We gave the Dallas Cowboys a C-. They signed Solomon Thomas, signed Robert Jones, signed Peyton Turner, Javonte Williams, let Rico Dowdle go, so it's just sort of a 1-in-1 out there. Signed Jack Sanborn as well to likely be a starting linebacker for them. Signed Miles Sanders after the Carolina Panthers released him. They traded for Kyer Elam, traded for Kenneth Murray as well. Re-signed Osa Odigizua, re-signed Kayvon Turpin. Those are really the big moves that they made there. What do you think about the Cowboys? Are they underwhelming? What happened here?
I think if you had this list of names, you would have thought it was a throwback Senior Bowl team. I get signing former first-round picks and trying to bank on the talent and what could be in the tank, but I really don't understand a lot of these signings in relation to what the Cowboys are trying to do. And I believe they also, along with Javonte Williams, I don't know if you mentioned it, they signed Miles Sanders, I believe, this morning too. So
yes, yep, I got it.
Okay, that's your running back room, and I don't know. I just, to me, there's not a whole lot to be a huge fan of. I think you have a lot of guys who have not lived up to their potential. And again, with the emphasis, what should have been the emphasis on running the football and stopping the run this offseason, I don't think the Cowboys have gotten much better at either. And I don't see how this set of players is going to change that result very much, barring, obviously, a potentially very good draft. They could have the 12th overall pick, but I'm not really getting, and do we think now, because all the talk has been if he gets there, Ashton Jinty to the Cowboys at 12, now that they have Javonte and they have Miles Sanders in there, are they going to go that route, or is it going to be offensive line?
No.
Is it going to be defensive line? I mean, I don't know. I just don't see the ceiling with this set of players. I like the Jack Sanborn signing. Obviously, he's got the connection with Matt Eberflus, but with those two goals in mind, wanting to run the football better and wanting to stop the run better, I don't know where they've accomplished that with this free agent class.
Yeah, this will make the conversations very interesting. The difference between team needs and what you think they'll actually do in the draft as we're sort of adjusting the team needs for the mock draft simulator. Because looking at Miles Sanders and Javonte Williams, would you say that the Dallas Cowboys could still use an upgrade at running back? Yeah, probably. Do we think they're going to hit running back relatively early? No, I don't. I don't anymore. So that's going to be one of the interesting conversations that we have. We're traveling north. We're going to the AFC North and the NFC North next. But before we do that, all the parents out there, I got a question for you. What does your child's future success look like for you? Maybe it's them, working a job that they absolutely love. Maybe they're the owners of that business. Maybe it's them getting to travel the world or just living a life that is very comfortable in a house they love and a place they love with their family. Whatever that is, whatever their dreams are, both big and small, you can help them achieve that with a kids investment account from Fabric by Gerber Life. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With the kids investment account from Fabric, you guys can start investing in your child's future today. Kids obviously cannot invest when they are minors, but this kids investment account specifically allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. Whole thing is online, very easy to set up an account, could take you as little as 5 minutes. Starts at just $20, no contribution limits on it. It's got all sorts of tax advantages. Funds are SIPC insured up to $500,000, and it's got no commission fees, just that low, flat monthly maintenance fee. Funds can be used for anything. When there are kids, it's tutors, music classes, sporting events, things like that. And then when they're a little bit older, maybe it is helping them start that first business, buying that first car, buying that first house, whatever it is, you can help them do that. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Start investing in your child's future today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Sorry, getting shows mixed up here. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL, MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolios are managed by Fort Washington Investment Advice Incorporated. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Learn more at meetfabric.com. In the AFC North, we'll start with the Baltimore Ravens, which got the highest grade from us in this division at a B-. What do we think about the Baltimore Ravens offseason here? It's one that was a little bit more quiet when you look at the total list of moves that they made. But, dude, they brought back Ronnie Stanley, right? That's exactly what they wanted to do. They were also able to re-sign Patrick Ricard. They re-signed Tylan Wallace. They signed DeAndre Hopkins. So this is a team that was one of the best teams in the NFL last season. They didn't have a lot of moves this offseason because, really, they didn't have to have a lot of moves this offseason. We gave them a B-. What do you think? I feel like we could have gone a little bit higher, actually, with the Baltimore Ravens. But what do you think about this?
I mean, considering their goals, they didn't have a ton of cap to work with. They needed to re-sign Ronnie Stanley. I think really that was the big one, is that the rest of their offseason, the draft, everything else was going to be set up by what happened with Ronnie Stanley, whether or not they could keep him. Now that they've kept him, they can go into the draft, especially with an open mind, and figure out maybe, okay, do we want to draft in the secondary, off the edge, maybe at receiver again? So I think that's the biggest part here where you could argue a higher grade is, look, if the goal alone was to keep Ronnie Stanley, they got that done. That's the first thing that needed to happen. Obviously, I like the DeAndre Hopkins signing as kind of a supplemental signing for the receiving core, free up Zay Flowers to move around the formation a little bit more, maybe get into a little more 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers on the field to mix it up. But I think it's also representative of where the Ravens are at as a team, right? They're an extremely good football team. They just need to execute in big moments in the playoffs. They didn't do it this past year against Buffalo. They haven't done it in the past against Kansas City. They just have to find a way to punch through that wall and break through and win a championship, right? So I think they have a championship caliber team. You can always add more pieces to it, but keeping Stanley sets them up with more flexibility to do that in this year's draft.
Again, yeah, I think that just we as a staff gave him a B-. I could definitely argue giving them a little bit higher given the expectations, and it's just about playing better for the Baltimore Ravens. And again, going back to what I was talking about a little bit with the Chiefs, do they see that vulnerability there for the Chiefs, right? Is this their year to really get over the hump and get over the big bad boogeyman that is this Kansas City Chiefs era? And I think that they certainly have the team to be able to do that, and I think that this free agency period was just a supplemental help to that goal and getting to that Super Bowl for the Ravens. Pittsburgh Steelers also got a B- from our staff here. They did sign Darius Slay, finally. It was reported that they had, and then there were like a couple of days that went by. I was like, hey, is this actually happening? It is. He signs a 1-year, $10 million deal. They brought back Mason Rudolph as well, as they are still mulling over what the contract details are going to be with Aaron Rodgers. It feels like he is going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, but they had to have some sort of option while they were waiting for Rodgers. Brought in Kenneth Gainwell as well, as they lost Najee Harris, so it'll be him and Jalen Warren, then the backfield there for Pittsburgh, pending somebody that they might draft in about a month and a half here. But the big move is that they brought in DK Metcalf. They traded for DK Metcalf, and they gave him a 5-year, $150 million extension. thoughts here on what Pittsburgh did and the B- grade that we gave them for this free agency week.
Yeah, this is one that I actually kind of played a part in arguing up to a B- because their original grade we had down was lower. But I think the fact that, my argument was the fact that you added DK Metcalf, and I know you're not a huge fan of the extension, and we know the skill set's a little bit redundant to George Pickens, but you're a better football team with DK Metcalf on your team, no question. Would you rather have DK Metcalf or Gator Great Van Jefferson or Mike Williams or any of those options? We know Metcalf is a better player than those guys. So even if it is going to be, again, a little bit redundant with Pickens, they're both vertical receivers, and they have to figure out how to work around that with whoever the quarterback is going to be. They're a more talented offense with Metcalf out there. It's a legitimate second threat. Really, to me, he's the first threat, and then Pickens is the second threat. But whichever way you want to look at it, they're a better offense with him in there. They just have to figure out who's throwing the ball. So I think a B- is reasonable. I do like the Darius Slay move a lot. That's by far their weakest part of their defense is their cornerbacks. I think to get Joey Porter, Darius Slay, Beanie Bishop in the slot isn't bad. They could still look to improve with younger players. Only a 1-year contract with Slay. So I think a good job of filling in some other needs. We just have no idea who the quarterback is, and that's
from a talent.
And this,
I was go ahead. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I mean, this grade, had they already signed, say, either Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, this grade would probably be even higher, right? Because at least we would have some sense of stability in knowing who's going to be the Week 1 starter. But for now, that's what keeps the ceiling off of it. But getting Metcalf at least makes you better as an offense, regardless of who's throwing the ball.
Yeah, I don't love the business, decisions that sort of went into acquiring Metcalf, but in a vacuum, of course, they are a better football team because he is there. So now it's up to them to maximize the way in which they acquired DK Metcalf, and we'll see if they can be able to do that. I am worried about Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback to orchestrate that offense with both DK Metcalf and George Pickens on there. And if you want to tell me that they're going to trade Pickens, well, they haven't yet. So I can't evaluate a Pickens trade if it has not happened yet for them. So I can understand. I like that we got it up to a B-. That's fine. I was sort of arguing it might be a little lower, but it's fine. I think when you look at the rest of that team, if they can get Rodgers, obviously acquiring DK Metcalf now, it's just about figuring how all those pieces work. We gave the Cincinnati Bengals a C+ here. The Bengals re-signed B.J. Hill. They re-signed Mike Gesicki, Joseph Osai, Samaje Perine, Marco Wilson, Cody Ford, Cam Sample, Tanner Hudson, released Alex Kappa, franchised T. Higgins. They signed T.J. Slayton. They signed Orion Burks, but they also lost Akeem Davis-Gaither, so sort of a one-in, one-out there with that linebacker signing. But of course, we talked about this yesterday. The vibes don't feel great in Cincinnati right now, right? Jamar Chase has to get paid. T. Higgins is going to want to get paid long-term. Trey Hendrickson, they're sort of shopping him-ish. It feels like the price tag for him is extremely high, so teams aren't really willing to pay for it, but he's sort of on the block there for them. What do you think about the Bengals and how they navigated this week? We gave them a C+ when it was all said and done.
Yeah, I think that kind of just represents it. Feels like they're spinning their wheels, right? I mean, they're going to need impact players on defense. Maybe they find those in the draft. But, I mean, T.J. Slayton is okay. Signing B.J. Hill back, he's a good player. He's not gonna change your defense by any means, right? Mike Gesicki, I know Joe Burrow's pointed out Gesicki as somebody that he wanted back who was a valuable piece of their offense. And I think now what we're waiting on is what happens with this Trey Hendrickson situation first and foremost. Is he going to get traded? Are they going to pay him? Is somebody else going to be willing to pay him and give up a premium draft pick for him? I mean, I don't feel any differently about the Cincinnati Bengals than I did, say, 2 or 3 weeks ago, right? And maybe even with the Hendrickson situation now a little bit worse. So I don't think there's anything here that's of particular impact that makes them dramatically improved than they were even at the end of last season when they got hot down the stretch. I think they're very reliant on the top end of this roster to win ball games.
We also gave the Cleveland Browns a C+ here. So the Browns, they signed Malik Collins, they signed Cornelius Lucas, they signed Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. The big move was, of course, them keeping Myles Garrett and keeping him happy at $40 million per year average. They traded for Kenny Pickett, also brought back Devin Bush at the linebacker level. They traded Dorian Thompson-Robinson, they traded Dalvin Tomlinson, and they traded Juan Thornhill. We gave them a C+ here. What did you think about Cleveland's offseason?
Yeah, I think the bulk of that grade on the positive side is finding a way to keep Myles Garrett, right? And there's obviously arguments of should they have traded him anyway and gotten a haul of draft picks and worked for the future, but they decided to make him the highest paid non-quarterback in the league, and I get it. Look, he's one of the all-time greats, and you want to build your defense around a guy like that. The one other signing I do like is Devin Bush, who very quietly had the best season of his career last year, filling in when Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah was injured, and I think another one-year prove-it deal. Hey, if you do it again this year, I think Devin Bush is a guy who could go into next offseason looking for a nice payday. But otherwise, look, I think we know where the Browns are at, right? They're very, very likely not going to win in 2025. We'll see if they can get a quarterback in this draft or if they're waiting for 2026. I would still heavily consider trading down from the second overall selection and getting more assets and building this roster. Again, an aging offensive line, not much at running back. Jerry Jeudy is your only good receiver right now, and a secondary that needs help as well. So I think this is a long-term project the Browns are looking at, and they until they get the Deshaun Watson contract out of the way, they're not going to have a ton of resources to add to this team anyway.
Before we move on from this division, Walt in the chat says Trey Hendrickson will get traded, so he's calling his shot there. And then SB in the chat says Jair Alexander and a third for Trey Hendrickson. Intriguing. Don't think it happens though, because
I don't think it happens, but I don't hate it.
The Bengals. I like the thought process, but the Bengals already don't want to pay players. So the whole idea of trading Trey Hendrickson is that you're trading him to get a bunch of draft capital to draft guys that are on cost-controlled rookie contracts. So I don't think that they would trade Trey Hendrickson just to get a third-round pick and then also have to pay Jair Alexander's contract, even though they could use a corner. They could use an impact corner if Jair Alexander is healthy. So, again, I don't hate it in theory. I just don't think that the Bengals would ever do something like that. Flip it over to the NFC North. This is our highest grade that we gave any team. Of course, because it's the highest grade that you can give out. We gave the Minnesota Vikings an A+ for this free agency period. Brought in Will Fries, brought in Ryan Kelly as well. They're releasing Garrett Bradbury, so they have their true starting interior offensive lineman. Traded away, who was it? Ed Ingram. They traded away him as well to the Houston Texans. And so they got the guys out of their interior offensive line that they were not happy with last year. Not only did they replace them, they got them off of the roster. So they replaced them with, I think, two good ones in Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. And then the other side of things, bringing in John Allen, bringing in Javon Hargrave, and I said this yesterday, even if they aren't exactly what they have been in their prime, they're still really good veteran interior defensive linemen for this team. So I love the moves that they made there. I think the icing on top is getting Isaiah Rodgers at the cornerback spot. You talked about how much you like this as a fit for them, as well as them re-signing Byron Murphy Jr., they re-signed Harrison Smith too, re-signed Aaron Jones, by the way, if you guys are watching and you want to see all of the free agency moves sorted by team or position or whatever, we still have the free agency tracker up over at pff.com, so you guys can go see that there. A+ here for the Minnesota Vikings. What do we think, Dalton?
I think I look through this list of signings that you just rattled off, and there's really not a single one I can sit here and hate on. I mean, maybe you could argue Jonathan Allen was a slight overpay, but it's the advantage that you have of letting Sam Darnold walk, assuming J.J. McCarthy is your quarterback, having all that extra cap space to work with because he's on a rookie contract, and they filled just about every need that they needed to, right? Interior pass protection, Ryan Kelly and Will Fries. Interior pass rush, Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave. Another talented corner in Isaiah Rodgers. You're getting Mekhi Blackmon back from injury. You re-signed Byron Murphy, who was a huge part of this defense last year. Re-signing Harrison Smith to another one-year deal. He's like the Levante David of the Vikings, right? Just a one-year deal. Every deal, and he just keeps leading that defense, and he's still really good. You know, re-signing Aaron Jones. I'd like to see them get some running back depth in this class, but Jones had a great year for them last year. That's the biggest part of it. There's not a single signing here that I can go, oh, I really don't like that. I don't think it fits. I think every one of these signings fits their football team, fits their needs. I think fits either what Brian Flores wants to do on defense or what Kevin O'Connell wants to do on offense. This is a home run off season. I think as long as the two big questions to me are how much left do Allen and Hargrave still have as pass rushers, and could they add a complementary run defensive tackle in there, maybe even in the first round of the draft? And just Will Fries' health, right? Coming off the injury, didn't play a ton. Is that breakout going to continue that looked like it was happening the first 5-6 weeks of last year before the injury? That's going to be the big one, but I think it is also a big help to get his Colts teammate Ryan Kelly right next to him, and the two of them together having already worked together. I think it's going to make that transition even easier.
Yeah, no, and the questions obviously of what JJ McCarthy's going to be like when he takes over that starting QB spot. And then the other question to me is now this offseason allows them to have maximum flexibility at 24 because they traded up for McCarthy last year, although it was a little trade up and then a little bit bigger of a trade up to go up and get Dallas Turner. The Bills kind of come and do in this mock draft, right? Or in this draft, I should say, 4 picks, and they pick at number 24. They don't pick again until 97. So do they have the flexibility to even trade out of the first round and get some more picks in this draft to supplement some of the moves that they made last draft weekend? I think that they have allowed themselves now to do it, which goes into that being not just an A, but an A plus in my opinion, how much flexibility it gives them in the draft. We gave the Chicago Bears an A minus. I love a lot of the moves that they have made. It's hard not to say an A. I think the reason why we gave them an A minus is because, the Dayo Odeyingbo deal, we like him being on the team, but it's a high price tag. You're really paying for him to be a better pass rusher than he has been so far in his career. You bring in Drew Dahlman, you trade for Jonah Jackson, you trade for Joe Thuney, you add Grady Jarrett, a veteran, along that defensive interior as well. I actually like the Olamide Zaccheaus signing as well, which is one that happened recently there for them. It's hard to not absolutely I think it's A minus is the lowest that you could possibly give the Chicago Bears. But if you wanted to argue for me that this is an A, then I totally agree with that. Or even an A plus, because again, how much flexibility it now gives them in the 2025 NFL draft. A minus for the Bears. What did you think about this?
Yeah, no, I think there's arguments, especially with the recent signing of Zaccheaus, that I like as a slot receiver, and even Durham Smythe as some tight end depth. I don't hate that at all. But the headline here is the offensive line, and Ben Johnson has clearly come into Chicago with the idea of making Caleb Williams' life easier, right? I mean, so many people think about, a quarterback's got to have the weapons. Well, he's got to be protected too, right? And I think between both the pass protection, especially that Joe Thuney gives you at one of those guard spots, and then the run game. We know Ben Johnson wants to run the football. We've seen how they've run the football the last couple of years in Detroit. Protecting Caleb Williams also involves taking a little bit off of his plate, right? So now they're looking at, okay, we're going to be thinking about, is it Ashton Jeanty with that 10th pick overall? Are we going full bore towards the run game here and having Caleb Williams throw it 25 times a game, something much lower than it was last year? I think it's been a great offseason. I think Ben Johnson's building this offense, especially in his image. They could still add a little more on defense. I think another talented defensive lineman wouldn't hurt. Maybe some help at safety as well with some of the injuries and, Kevin Byard being a little bit older back there. But this offensive line alone gets us in the A territory here, at A-minus territory. And then it's a matter of how you judge those other signings. I do like Odeyingbo. I do like Grady Jarrett. Maybe a little bit expensive considering the years they're coming off of, but I completely understand trying to build the depth and getting veteran talent in the trenches. And this offensive line, again, the Drew Dahlman headline signing, to me, you've heard me say it all week, I think that's one of the headline signings of this entire free agency period.
Detroit Lions, we gave them a straight B for their moves this offseason. Their signings brought in DJ Reed. They lost Carlton Davis, but they brought in DJ Reed, so it's DJ Reed alongside Terrion Arnold and then Ennis Rakestraw Jr. as well, who they drafted last year. They brought in Roy Lopez as well, brought back Levi Nwuzurike, brought back Marcus Davenport, brought back Derek Barnes. They moved on from Zadarius Smith and Jalen Reeves-Maybin. Also signed Grant Stewart to be sort of that special teams linebacker there for them. Re-signed Dan Skipper along the offensive line. Want to make sure I shouted that one out too. So just a straight up B for the Detroit Lions. Do you think that's fair for them?
I think that's fair. I think that the heaviest bit of that for me is getting DJ Reed at the value that they got him at. When you look at some of the other corners got, right? When you think about a guy, I know it's an extension, but say J.C. Horn got $25 million. When Byron Murphy got $22 million a year. When Carlton Davis, that former Lion, went to New England and got $20 million a year, and they got DJ Reed at $16 million a year, and you're talking about a guy who's been as consistent as any cornerback in football at a position of high volatility, right? He's had a 70-plus grade in 6 straight years. You just don't see that out at that spot. Usually, there's at least one down year mixed in there where he just had some bad luck or got beat a few times, but Reed's as consistent as any cornerback in football. I think he's a great player to bring in alongside Terrion Arnold, Ennis Rakestraw. Obviously, the 2 safeties that they have are very dynamic. I think it's a fantastic signing for, one, the stability he gives you with his availability. He rarely misses games, and 2, he's just the same consistent player, right? I think, is he closer to high-end CB2 maybe than a CB1? Sure, but he shows up every week and he plays relatively well every single week. I think Reed's a fantastic signing for them, and that carries the heaviest weight here. Yeah,
and I think you probably drafted Terrion Arnold to be a CB1 for you, and so if you have two guys who are at least high-end CB2s. I think you feel good about it, and you're hoping that Arnold can really take that next step. And then obviously I think whatever Ennis Rakestraw Jr. is sort of icing on the cake. And I really like Ennis Rakestraw Jr. So I do like that cornerback trio that they have there. Amik Robertson as well. I got to throw him in there in that cornerback rotation because I forgot about him earlier in the week and got called out for it, deservingly so, because I do like Amik Robertson. I really do. That's not to mention some of the guys that they have in and out of the slot that come from the safety position too. We gave the Green Bay Packers a C-. So they signed Aaron Banks for a 4-year, $77 million deal. Signed Nate Hobbs to a 4-year, $48 million deal. But that Nate Hobbs deal, a lot of the guarantee, I mean, it's like $16 million guaranteed. So a lot of that is sort of incentive and roster bonuses, and obviously him playing very, very well for that team. I think the Nate Hobbs move is probably, one where they're anticipating moving on from Jair Alexander. Eric Stokes is no longer on the team either. They've got some younger corners there still on the depth chart. But Green Bay, they had big wide receiver 1 needs. It had some pass rushing issues, cornerback issues. It just doesn't feel like they got the Nate Hobbs signing, but again, it's a deal that even when you look at it, the guarantees really aren't there for us. So how much confidence do they really have in this deal? It just feels like they spent a lot of money, or the contract numbers are inflated. And I don't think the Green Bay Packers are that much better than what they were when they started free agency. That's why they're a C-, and I agree with this one.
I'm with it, and the Aaron Banks signing is a little confusing to me, considering I thought they were trying to find internal options, say with Jordan Morgan on this interior of the offensive line. I know, it looks like right now the plan is going to be to replace Josh Myers at center, to move Elgton Jenkins over, start Aaron Banks at left guard, and then you still have this mystery at right guard. Last year was they were rotating and Jordan Morgan had injuries, but between Jordan Morgan and Sean Ryan, there has to be some sort of solution, and I don't think rotating the two players mid-game is going to be the option. So it makes me wonder if they've really thought through a more viable solution, because Aaron Banks, even in pass protection, is 3 years as a starter, 61, 50, and 60 pass blocking grades. That's not worth what did they pay him? $19 million a year? I mean, I'm a little bit lost on where the Packers are at on this offensive line right now, and what their level of faith is in Jordan Morgan, who was their first round pick just last year.
Yeah, I'm with you. It was kind of a perplexing Packers offseason that, again, I just don't think this team's any better. Now, that doesn't mean they were a bad football team before the offseason began, but I don't think they're any better, and I think that they spend a decent chunk of change just sort of stay the same, and you never want that. If you're spending a good amount of salary cap space, you obviously want to be better as a football team. So I can understand the C- grade there for them. I really can. For the AFC South, we'll go to the AFC South next. Indianapolis Colts. We gave them the highest grade of any of these 4 teams at a straight B. Brought in Charvarius Ward to play at one of those cornerback spots. Love that move. Think he's a good scheme fit there. Cam Bynum. I'm a little bit higher on the Cam Bynum signing than I think you are, so I'm cool with this B grade. They also brought in Daniel Jones, who, think whatever you want about Daniel Jones. At least that's legitimate competition for Anthony Richardson. You would say to yourself, if you want Anthony Richardson to be that franchise caliber quarterback for you, well, then guess what? He needs to be better than Daniel Jones, who is a spot starter for, well, I shouldn't say spot starter. He was the starter for all those years when he was with the New York Giants. Now, did it pan out and did he hit a ceiling that he needed to? No, but this dude started in this league. He's won games in this league, and he will push Richardson to at least have a floor that you feel good about as a quarterback. So going into this year, if you're taking what Chris Ballard said at face value and say, hey, we're going to get some competition for Anthony Richardson, I actually like this move a lot. I actually like the fact that they targeted Daniel Jones, because I think it makes a lot of sense given the fact that Jones has his rushing ability as well. So you're not really changing the offense a lot because that's sort of the dangerous part about pushing Anthony Richardson in a quarterback competition, right? Look at what Joe Flacco was last year. Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson are 2 completely different quarterbacks at this point in time with Joe Flacco's where he is in his NFL career. One, he was never really mobile anyways, but he doesn't even have the big arm that he used to, like Richardson does. So you're almost calling 2 completely different offenses for the backup quarterback and for the starter. That's not really a good way to evaluate those 2 guys. With Daniel Jones, Anthony Richardson is more talented than Daniel Jones is, but their skill sets are of the same archetype, at least. You can design the same offense for both of these guys to play. So it will be a true competition of, we pretty much have the same offense for both of these guys. who can operate it better throughout training camp. And you certainly hope that the answer is Anthony Richardson, but I really like the Daniel Jones signing because of exactly what it could be in that regard. They signed Neville Gallimore as well, signed Khalil Herbert. This one's a B. I think this one could have been higher. This one could have been, I would have argued probably a B plus for the Indianapolis Colts. I know that they lost a lot on the interior offensive line, but they have some guys that they're probably pretty comfortable playing in those positions that were able to play last year when Will Fries got hurt and guys were in and out of that lineup. What do you think about the Colts here getting a B from us?
No, I think it's about right. Like you said, depending on how Jones pans out for them and even how the secondary pans out for them, obviously, we could go back on the hindsight and give it a B plus or an A minus. But I think obviously not a high volume class. But I'm with you on Jones, and I think the biggest advantage that he has over Anthony Richardson in what they say is going to be an open competition is, look, it's going to sound simple, but he completes passes, right? He doesn't have anywhere near the arm strength that Richardson does, but in that 15 and under range, Daniel Jones can run this offense. You got to remember, this is a team that went 9-8 2 years ago, mostly with Gardner Minshew running their offense, and I think Jones has certainly more talent than Minshew does athletically, and the arms are probably at least about equal, if not Jones being a little bit better. So I think that's a good move, and then I think it's an interesting insight with Ward and Bynum, how Lou Anarumo wants to build this secondary. Ward is a very good zone corner. Bynum as a versatile safety who could be a little more consistent in coverage, but he's willing to come up and hit for sure. So, again, I'm a little surprised that Bynum got the same dollar amount per year that say somebody like Javon Holland did. I thought the Colts would be more in on that, but that's how they want to build this secondary with these two players, and I don't think it's out of the realm that they could still draft somebody even early in the draft in the secondary, whether it's an outside corner or another safety. They need a lot of help back there, but between those two and the Daniel Jones signing, I think you have to like what the Colts have done, and the quarterback situation, if it really is an open competition like they're saying, becomes arguably the most interesting through the preseason in the NFL.
I would agree. Jacksonville Jaguars are the next team. We gave them a C+ for their moves here. They released Evan Ingram. They released Devin Duvernay, released Ronald Darby as well. They traded away Christian Kirk to the Houston Texans. And then they had a handful of signings here. Patrick McCarry was the biggest signing for them at 3 years, $37.5 million. They signed Jordan Lewis as well to help out their secondary. Diami Brown, Eric Murray at the safety spot from losing Andre Sisco, so that's sort of a one in, one out there. Signed Robert Hainsey in a 3-year, $21 million deal. I do like that one as well. Backup quarterback Nick Mullins now on this team. Couple of tight ends and Johnny Munt and Hunter Long. Also, Chuma Edoga along the offensive line on a 2-year, $7 million deal. So a lot of guys in and out, and that's what you would expect, right? I mean, it's a new regime, new head coach, new general manager. You figured that there would be a handful of changes throughout this roster, whether they were splash guys or just depth guys, players that these coaches and general managers, front office people preferred. We ended up giving the Jags a C+ here. What did you think?
I think it's about right. I think there's some moves that I do like. Certainly Patrick McCarry, I think, is probably the best signing out of all of them. I don't hate the Robert Hainsey signing, considering they had Mitch Morse retire and they needed something at center. He was a decent center. Certainly 2 years ago with the Bucs, with Tom Brady running the show there, and then he got replaced by Graham Barton this past year, but made one start and a good one against New Orleans. We'll see what that turns into. If he can at least be a league average center, then you've made a good signing for $7 million a year. But otherwise, I think some puzzling moves, right? When you look at Jordan Lewis coming in from Dallas, and which between him or Jerrion Jones is somebody going to move out of that slot role, right? You're not going to pay. You're not going to have two slot guys in that starting role like that. Somebody's got to move outside or to safety or somewhere. Diami Brown, I like the signing, but you're kind of loaded at receiver now. You've got Brian Thomas.
I like it at least because it gives you another vertical outside option to where, we heard that the Jags are going to want to use Brian Thomas Jr. more in the slot, basically more everywhere. And to me, if you were disappointed on what you've gotten from Gabe Davis so far, at least maybe Diami Brown can be like, okay, well, we feel good about him playing on the outside and moving Brian Thomas Jr. in the slot. So I can see the vision there, even though I'm not sure how high the impact individually Diami Brown is going to give you.
Yeah, no, and then I think you're looking at, I know they signed Hunter Long here, but they're going to have a need at tight end, with Evan Ingram gone. We'll see if they pick up another tight end maybe to help them out in the receiving game. I just think There's some good here. There's some questionable here. I don't know that they are significantly better. Maybe the offensive line, especially with Makari, who's going to be slated to start, I think, at the right guard spot with Ezra Cleveland as the left guard. That's going to be the part that I'm curious about is do they continue to supplement this offensive line with young players that they can develop behind these guys and continue to protect Trevor Lawrence going forward? Because that's the biggest thing for me. We've seen the last 2 seasons he's been injured at the end of these years, so they need to protect him. I like the weaponry as a whole. Obviously, building around Brian Thomas Jr. is the right way to go about it. Now, I'm very interested to see what they do with this 5th pick in the draft. I think it's going to be a defensive player. That seems like the way we're going here, and it's a matter of if they're going to continue to add to the secondary as they've done in free agency, or somebody like Mason Graham on the inside to help the defensive line.
Houston Texans got a C- from us, and they were busy this week in a lot of ways when it came to addition and subtraction, both with signings, re-signings, and then also you could throw in there trades and releases too. So they traded Laramie Tunsil, they traded away Kenyon Green, they released Shaq Mason, but then they got Ed Ingram for the Minnesota Vikings. They got C.J. Gardner-Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles, and they got Christian Kirk from the Jacksonville Jaguars. So those are their trades there. They re-signed Derek Barnett. They re-signed Mario Edwards Jr., Dario Ogunbowale, Jake Hansen, MJ Stewart as well. And then some outside signings. They brought in Sheldon Rankins, Terrell Taylor, Laken Tomlinson, Nick Neiman, Braxton Berrios, Casey Toohill, Justin Watson, the wide receiver from Kansas City. So when you look at the Houston Texans, C-, it's a lot of moving parts, but I don't disagree with this, especially because your offensive line, which was an area of need for you going into this offseason, in my opinion, got significantly worse. Now, we've obviously heard some rumblings afterwards, some reports, hey, the guys in the offensive line room weren't the dogs we wanted them to be in Houston. That's fine, but you totally sacrificed the talent ceiling of this offensive line to up the dog meter. Maybe that's what matters most in the long term. But next year for C.J. Stroud, their projected starting offensive line is now Titus Howard, Juice Scruggs, Jarrett Patterson, Laken Tomlinson, Blake Fisher. That's tough. That's tough to go into Stroud's year 3 of his rookie contract and say, no, we're good. We're good here. I would love to be totally proven wrong. I would love for this to be a top 10, top 5 offensive line in the NFL because it means that C.J. Stroud is going to put up some bonker plays and bonker numbers that we all get to watch and marvel at. But it's hard for me to look at what the Houston Texans did and think that they are more talented than they were last year. And I think that's why I agree with the C- here.
Yeah, they're certainly not a balanced football team, right? On the offensive side, you've got Stroud, you've got Nico Collins. I actually like Christian Kirk's fit in this offense, especially if Tank Dell is going to miss the entire 2025 season. They need one more receiver, but you look at the 2 big weaknesses for me. The offensive line, which obviously, as you just said, has been torn apart now, and without Laramie Tunsil, with Laramie Tunsil, they were 21st in pass blocking grade last year. I have a hard time believing that's going to improve with the unit you just mentioned. And the other one is defensive tackle and stopping the run, right? I love their pass defense. Anderson and Hunter off the edge. The secondary is absolutely loaded, even more so now with Gardner-Johnson in there. But look, on the inside, at their D tackles and the linebackers, you can run right at the Houston Texans. I think we saw that on Christmas Day when they played the Baltimore Ravens, right? And they just ran all over them with Derrick Henry. This is a problem, and, they bring back some of the players, Mario Edwards included there, who struggled last year in run defense. You bring in Sheldon Rankins, who, isn't the run defender he used to be. He's got a sub-50 run defense grade in 3 of the past 4 years, including one with Houston already in 2023. So their actual weaknesses that I had coming out of the end of the season when they lost to Kansas City, those have not improved at all, and on the offensive line, certainly it's gotten worse without Tunsil.
Titans, we also gave a C- to round out this division. Made a lot of signings, kind of like the Packers. Don't really think they got better. Now, the Packers made a few signings, and I don't really think they got better. The Titans, they paid a lot of money for Dan Moore Jr. to come over and play offensive tackle for them. So 4 years, $82 million deal there for Dan Moore Jr. That was one of the highest contracts over projected that we had over at PFF. They brought in Draymond Jones, Cody Barton at linebacker. Kevin Zeitler, I do like that deal. I think he could be a solid guard for them. Safety Xavier Woods, wide receiver Van Jefferson, tackle Blake Hance, punter Johnny Hecker, quarterback Brandon Allen. I don't think the Titans got better, man. I think they spent a lot of money. I think there's a lot of new names that are in there. Maybe it's just turning over the roster and getting the guys that you want on the team, but it's hard to look at the Titans and think, yeah, they got a lot more draft flexibility in particular, right? I think what we saw from their free agency period, they're taking Cam Ward number 1 overall. How can they not? They have Will Levis and Brandon Allen now as the quarterbacks on their roster. You cannot sell to this fan base, even if I'm not totally giving up on Will Levis in his NFL career. I'm not. But for this specific upcoming season, how do you sell to your fan base the guy that had every chance to be your starting quarterback moving forward last season, and he was benched, I believe, twice, at least once for it, where he was out and then he was in the lineup, and it's a really, really hard sell to your fan base, and I don't think the Titans are going to do that. I think they're going to draft Cam Ward number 1 overall because I don't think they have a choice but to. Yeah. So I don't feel like they got any more flexible. I don't think this team really got better from a talent perspective. So it's hard for me to give it anything better than a C minus.
I think the best way we can put this is if they walk into next year, let's say they take Abdul Carter or whatever, right? If they walk into next year with Will Levis and Brandon Allen, they're going to be in contention for the number 1 pick again. And that's not obviously where you want to be 2 years in a row. So, you mentioned it. I think the Kevin Zeitler signing is the best signing here. He's still a very good player at his age. Xavier Woods is not bad at safety. He's at least a durable player who can start week in and week out for you. But I'm with you. It feels like they're grabbing for straws a bit on this offensive line right now. We presume they're gonna move J.C. Latham back to right tackle where he played in college. Dan Moore Jr. is going to be a $20 million a year left tackle after never grading above the mid-60s in his career in Pittsburgh and really kind of, being suspect in pass protection his entire career there. Cody Barton, I don't think fixes a lot for the struggling linebacking core. He kind of struggled in Denver last year, and now they're giving him a 3-year contract. So Tennessee, you mentioned it, pretty sure they're loading up to take Cam Ward. You have Will Levis and Brandon Allen in the room. I think is Brandon Allen, is he familiar to Brian Callahan from the Cincinnati days? Wasn't Brandon Allen in Cincinnati? I think that might be just a familiarity signing there. You know me with the connections. I'm pretty sure that's the case. He was there at some point backing up Burrow. But no, I think
2020 to 2022. So I do think that he would have been there when Brian Callahan was there.
So that's one thing I do wonder about is if he's holding Levis for now to not give away what he's doing first overall. But it's hard to imagine, honestly, if they're going to draft Cam Ward, I don't know that Will Levis will be even on the roster of this team come week 1.
Every year that Brandon Allen was with the Cincinnati Bengals, all 3 of those years, Brian Callahan was the offensive coordinator for that team. So yes, good connection there. All right, that's good. Especially backup quarterback, that feels like maybe the position the most where you go, okay, where's the coach connection? Who's the guy that I can depend on to play backup quarterback for me? So that's the AFC South. We're flipping over to the NFC South now. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I think the staff had them with like a B+, and I argued that this should be an A-. So I'm saying that it's an A- here for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They brought back Chris Godwin. They brought back Ben Bredeson to part of it, one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, at least a top 10 offensive line in the NFL that continues, I think, to get better as they grow together because they're keeping the same starting 5, which I think is huge. They brought back Levante David, which is big. They made a splash signing in getting Hassan Reddick to supplement probably their biggest need that they had on the team, and that is a pass rusher to win one-on-one in a lot of different pass rush specific situations. So they did all that, and I think some people might look at it and be like, well, okay, so it's the same team as last team. They brought in Hassan Reddick, who was sort of an experiment that failed with the New York Jets. They didn't really get better at corner. How are you giving this an A-? Well, if they were to go out and say, let's say they signed DJ Reed, right, and they really address their big cornerback need as well, you're probably not able to bring Levante David back then at that point, and you probably lose out on the bidding for Chris Godwin. So is bringing in DJ Reed to hit the cornerback need more important than now making linebacker a glaring need and losing Chris Godwin? No, I think they navigated this exactly the way they needed to for the salary cap space that they had. They brought back the players that were good for them last year, as, remember, a playoff team, another division-winning team, and they brought in Hassan Reddick. Now they freed themselves up to do whatever they want at number 19. It could be a corner if a corner falls to them. It could be an impact linebacker. It could be another pass rusher to get even more juice in pass rush there. I thought the Buccaneers did an excellent job. I'm not trying to play homer here. I think it's an A-. Do you push back on me with the A-? Would you go into the B range? What are we doing? Give me a non-Tampa rooted opinion here with the Buccaneers.
No, I think somewhere between a B+ and an A- makes sense. And I think for the second straight offseason, Jason Light, look, he just keeps fitting these pieces that made his team good already and just keeps finding a way to retain him. And I think Chris Godwin, I believe I heard him say himself in an interview that he had bigger offers elsewhere, but he's comfortable in Tampa. And you've talked about this before with Godwin, how you were like, look, I'm 99% sure he's staying. He loves it in Tampa. He loves the culture down there. And you look at this team and the stability it has, right, with look, you have the same quarterback you've had the last 2 years. You're bringing back all 5 of the starting offensive line and one that was ascending last year. You're bringing back all your top weapons. And if Chris Godwin's healthy, Evans, Godwin, McMillan looks like a fantastic front three and all the things they can do in their offense to create matchups with those guys, plus Cade Otton at tight end, plus the 2 running backs. And now just keep filling out talent on this defense. And I know we talk about cornerback, but Jamel Dean and Zion McCollum is not a bad pair to have, right? I think, to me, this team had more issues with their middle-of-the-field coverage, right? I don't think Jordan Whitehead gave them last year what they thought he would at safety returning to Tampa. The linebacker spot especially. I know Levante David, he's the franchise stalwart. He's going to be there. But adding some sort of athleticism at linebacker, I look at a guy, you've mentioned him a lot lately as the top linebacker in the draft class. Jahad Campbell would fit in this team perfectly, wouldn't he?
I mean, he's going to be very high on their draft board.
If he were to fall to 19, I think that would be the home run pick. Put him next to Levante David as the heir to the captain of this ship, pun intended apparently, and just get, the. See, now I'm just making the advertisement. Now they're going to trade up for him is what's going to happen after that one. But no, I mean that to me is it's coverage over the middle of the field. I think that was even a bigger issue than at corner, because if you still walked in at corner next year with Zion McCollum, Jamel Dean, and Tyke Smith, who was really good last year in his rookie year in the slot, I think you're still fine there, right? If you want to make a midseason acquisition, cool. But I think middle of the field coverage, linebacker, safety, and maybe if you want to add a young pass rusher, if there's someone that they really like to complement Reddick, to complement Diaby, and then the guys inside, I think they're in a good spot here to improve this defense in this draft, because keeping Godwin's the headline, and their offense is absolutely loaded.
Carolina Panthers, we gave them I believe a B, straight B here for the Carolina Panthers. A lot of defensive additions here for them. Tershawn Wharton, it's a pretty hefty contract for him, but yeah, I mean, they're trying to beef up the interior defensive line and free up Derek Brown to be a roaming superstar for them at 3-tech and nose tackle, whatever it is when he is back fully healthy. Added Bobby Brown as well, who's a good run defender for the Los Angeles Rams last year. Added Trayvon Merrick on the back end. Patrick Jones is the second to supplement some of their edge pass rush needs. Brought in Rico Dowdle, who I really like as a spell back to Chuba Hubbard there in that running back room. Re-signed Brady Christensen, Michael Jackson, Andy Dalton, Austin Corbett, Tommy Tremble. Extended J.C. Horn. They released Miles Sanders, but we already talked about how it was a little bit of a one in, one out, and he wasn't really worth that contract that they were giving him. And I think that Rico Dowdle is a better complement anyways, especially with Jonathan Brooks also recovering from his second ACL tear. I think that that's the route that you would rather go, is having Chuba Hubbard. Okay, he's got a lot of money. Now you're giving it to Rico Dowdle as well, while Jonathan Brooks comes back and you see what you have there with him. Panthers didn't get that wide receiver one that they needed. But what do we think about their offseason? Is B fair for them?
I think it's fair, and I know there were the Milton Williams rumors, and they almost had him, and then the Patriots just came in with a monstrous contract, right, for Milton Williams and swiped him away. But I think this is kind of the approach I figured they would take at the beginning of this, is find several serviceable starters on a defense that was the lowest graded in football last year. Tershawn Wharton, is he a world beater? No, but he is certainly a starter. Trayvon Merrick's a good signing at safety. Pat Jones, Bobby Brown, Christian Roseboom is an active linebacker. He's among the league's leading tacklers last year. I think the re-sign of Mike Jackson at corner is a big move. I think he played really well for them last year, despite a defense really decimated with injuries. I think Horn and Jackson is really a nice place to start at corner. I know, obviously, eventually could you improve on Jackson? Sure, but he's at least, I think, the way he played last year, an average starter who can fill in that CB2 spot. It's a quantity approach on defense, but it's what they need, right? I mean, they need to get healthy. They need more serviceable starters, because last year they just didn't have enough of them. Gave up over 3,000 yards rushing last year. You just can't have that across a 17-game season. So I think, look, they're looking to add star power in this draft. They're trying to raise the floor of this defense before anything else. I think it's similar to what Jonathan Gannon tried to do with the Arizona Cardinals last year. Just raise the floor. Don't give up so many explosive plays. Play fundamentally sound football, and we'll find stars as we go. You're not going to find a million superstars in one offseason. That's where Carolina's at right now. Again, I know they tried for Milton Williams. Didn't work. Another team outbid them. I don't know if they would have wanted to pay Williams $26 million a year anyway, like New England did, and that's okay, right? I know we can all play hypothetical, but they got several, I'm counting 5 external serviceable starters that they got out of this offseason. So I think it makes them better. I don't think, if you want to rotate defensive linemen and however else, but I don't think it's an approach that I didn't expect from them, just finding as many serviceable players as it can in a defense that had a ton of holes last year.
We give the New Orleans Saints a B-. Really, honestly, just becoming cap compliant and actually still being able to make signings, I think is it's a job well done in and of itself. I don't really know how they do it every single year. They signed Justin Reed, which I think was huge for them. Signed Isaac Yiadom as well to play corner. Needed a cornerback need after Paulson Adebo went to the Giants in free agency. Jack Stoll, one of the players who's one of the most memeable names we've seen in NFL history. Will Clapp. Devon Goshawk, they traded for him to give them some depth along the defensive line. They brought back Chase Young, brought back Juwan Johnson, brought back Dante Pettis. They released Jamal Williams. B- here for the New Orleans Saints. How do we feel about it?
It's probably about right. I mean, keeping Chase Young, I think, is a good move. He had 66 pressures this last year, and he was really, I would argue, he's their best pass rusher, and you at least have an edge duo that's decent in Young and Carl Granderson, and you still have Cam Jordan for at least one more year, right? But I think the theme still holds the same as far as what they need to do moving forward, and that's get better in the trenches, right? On the defensive line, on their offensive line, maybe a right tackle, maybe somebody like Armand Membu, but their secondary is going to be solid with Reed, with Tyrann Mathieu, with some of the young corners they have back there. They still have Demario Davis at linebacker. He's not quite what he used to be. He started to slow down a little bit last year, but still obviously a very good player. I think that's the theme moving forward is got to keep getting better in the trenches. Absolutely. This team will not improve significantly until they get better in the trenches. That's where it's at. Offensive, defensive line, I think that's heavily where I'd go moving forward.
A lot of people in the chat are saying that the Saints should have gotten a D because they should have just, bit the bullet and fully gone into the rebuild of where they are right now. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but they're not doing that. So of the path in which they have chosen, I actually think they did a decent job this offseason. If you want to say like C+ instead of B-, okay, maybe you could argue something in the C range just because they're not really that impactful and you're losing a lot of talent. But I don't think that I can't fairly judge the Saints and what they did this week off of a path of they should have just totally, leaned into the rebuild because that's not what they were doing. So it's hard for me to totally judge against that there. It's not the direction that I would have gone, but for the direction that they are going, I think they did fine. The Atlanta Falcons, they got a C. Signed Leonard Floyd after he got released from the San Francisco 49ers. Signed Devon Diablo from the Las Vegas Raiders as well. Signed cornerback Mike Ford. They re-signed Mike Hughes, one of their outside corners. Re-signed Josh Woods, their linebacker. Elijah Wilkins, an offensive tackle. Wide receiver Kadero Hodge for a 2-year, $6 million deal. They extended they extended Jake Matthews and released Grady Jarrett. It's an offseason where I don't really know how much better the Atlanta Falcons are given the moves that they made this offseason. What do you think?
No, you're right. And I think what it is, in the same, I don't think this is said enough this offseason with the Falcons, in the same way that we talk about the Browns and just being completely held up by Deshaun Watson's contract this year. That's where the Falcons are at with Kirk Cousins, right? And obviously, I think Arthur Blank has said to Kirk Cousins, look, we're not just going to cut you. We could trade you if somebody wants to give us something for you, or we could just keep you as one of the best backups in football, and we'll just eat the money for one more year and cut you next offseason, right? So they're held up by that contract, right? Michael Penix is going to go into this year as the starter. They're going to have an extremely expensive backup in Kirk Cousins, most likely, unless they find a trade partner, which I think is unlikely at this point, considering his contract, unless maybe somebody like Cleveland gets desperate and wants to do that. But I like the Leonard Floyd signing. I think the rest of this is just kind of holding steady. I think where they're going to have to get better on defense is in the draft, right? I could even see them getting one more receiver in there, right? They've got Darnell Mooney. They've got Drake London. I think they could use one more. But this is going to be a year where they have to improve through the draft, and they have to improve just from the fact that Michael Penix is going to play hopefully a full 17 games this year. I know he's got an injury history from college, but if he can play all 17 games the way that he played his first few starts of his career last year, I think then they're in business.
The Falcons will be paying Kirk Cousins $40 million on their cap space to be their backup quarterback this year.
I mean, it's pretty much dead money anyway. If they cut him, that's just going to be dead money. It doesn't matter. They have $25 million in negative dead money if they cut him. So there's no relief if they cut him. Now, if you wait a year from now,
you can designate him as a post-June 1 cut, and you can get $45 million in cap space there. So you get a ton of relief after this season, and I think that that's the way that they're operating, and that was one of the paths that could have happened with this contract. All right, moving on to the West. AFC West is the first team that we're talking about here. By the way, if you guys are watching the channel and you are not subscribed to it yet, please do so. We obviously gave you a lot of content here during free agency week, but that doesn't stop next week. We're going to be evaluating some of these players in much more detail, exactly what they are bringing to teams. We're going to be bringing you some film breakdowns, some data breakdowns of exactly what these new additions are going to do for their new organizations. Then, of course, we're turning the page a little bit more towards the NFL draft as well. We'll solidify the team needs. We'll go through team-centric mock drafts, full first-round mock drafts, multi-round mock drafts, and we will get you for the NFL draft in a way where nobody else can. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so. We would love you for it. And if you're watching the video and you haven't liked it yet, please like the video if you enjoy what you're hearing. We appreciate everybody in chat getting in the chat, liven things up. It's fun for us to kind of go back and forth and look at what you guys are talking about while we are doing the show as well. So salute to you if you're here live in the chat doing that. Denver Broncos. We gave the Denver Broncos an A. I believe this is the second best grade that we gave, at least tied for it. We had the Minnesota Vikings with an A+. I love what the Denver Broncos did. Love Talanoa Hufanga. Love Drake Greenlaw. If those guys work out when it comes to, I know there's a little bit of health concern with them as they were both coming off injury-riddled seasons, but man, when these guys are playing at their best, the team speed, the physicality, it just elevates one of the best defenses in the NFL last year to potentially that top 3 and maybe even best defense in the league in 2025. Also love what they did with Evan Ingram, bringing him in, signing him to a 2-year, $23 million deal, because now it does not feel like they are pigeonholed to drafting tight end at number 20. I think they have a ton of draft flexibility now, and like we have said before here, even on this show, free agency is not just about the guys that you bring in. It's also about how much flexibility you give yourself for the draft. And the Denver Broncos hit a home run in both of those categories. It's why it can't be anything less than an A, in my opinion. What'd you think of these signings?
No, I agree. The one that stands out to me is the Greenlaw signing. If he's the Drake Greenlaw we know and love from before his Achilles injury, I think this is a fantastic move. The linebacker position was the one that was by far the biggest weakness for Denver on their defense, on what is a very good defense. And these two signings, Greenlaw and Hufanga, could make them an elite defense. Their defensive line was top 10. The secondary was top 10. Their linebackers were 26. So if he improves that, and he's what he was all those years in San Francisco next to Fred Warner as the lead guy of this linebacking core, and maybe they even draft another one in the middle rounds to go along with them. They're trying to figure out other solutions. They re-signed Justin Strnad. They still have Drew Sanders, who was I believe, second-round pick a couple of years ago. But Greenlaw as the captain in the middle of that defense with Hufanga floating around the box the way that he can, I think Sean Payton, especially with the money that Denver gave them, I think Sean Payton identified these two guys as guys that I need that can change really the way that his defense can be dynamic. In the same way he's talked about his offense needs to get dynamic, his defense can get more dynamic. Now, I think Hufanga's a great partner to Brandon Jones at safety, and I think if Greenlaw works out and he's healthy and he is what he's been all these years in San Francisco, I'm with you. I think this defense especially, they've hit a home run this offseason.
Las Vegas Raiders, we gave the Raiders a B. Curious what Walt thinks about this one with the Raiders getting a B. I know that they were not able to re-sign his boy Robert Spillane, but they signed Jeremy Chin after losing Trayvon Merrick. They signed Alex Kappa along the offensive line, taking a chance on Eric Stokes at the cornerback position after losing Nate Hobbs. Also signed Raheem Mostert for their backfield. Signed Landon Roberts at the linebacker level to try to make up for losing Robert Spillane. But the big one is, they traded for Geno Smith. They also re-signed Malcolm Kuntz, which I love. Extended Max Crosby, extended Isaiah Polamalu at the safety level. What'd you think about the Raiders? I think B is fair, honestly. I think B is pretty fair for the Raiders. I love them getting aggressive and going out to get Geno Smith when he became available. He is still, in my opinion, one of the certainly top half starters in the NFL. I think he's that fringe tier 3, tier 2 quarterback. So I think Geno can really win you some games in this league. And they're really hitting the ground running with a new regime with John Spytek at general manager, Pete Carroll at head coach. And I think that they are going to be a force to be reckoned with. I don't think that they're a deep playoff team quite yet, but they're going to be a tough out, in my opinion, with Geno Smith. And so that division only got better. I like the B grade here for the Raiders. What do you think here?
Yeah, I like the Geno trade a lot, considering they only gave up the 92nd overall pick to get him, and you get arguably a guy who's been a top 10 to 12 quarterback over the last 3 years. I really like retaining Malcolm Kuntz on another one-year deal. He missed this past season with injury, but he was really coming on down the stretch in 2023. And then I think the rest of these signings, they're value signings. They're guys who can fill in, but I think it's very clear, too, that Spytek and Pete Carroll are going to take the approach of, look, in the secondary, at linebacker, at running back, and possibly at receiver early, they're going to build through the draft, right? They're going to find talented guys in the draft that they want. They're not going to blow it out to just try to win this season, even though with a veteran quarterback like Geno, they're going to want to win more games for sure, and he certainly raises the floor on their offense because we knew going into last year with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, they just didn't have a chance. They didn't have a chance to win a whole lot of games last year. Geno gives them a chance as long as they further improve this team. You also have the Max Crosby extension to keep him happy. So I think the core of this team is starting to round into shape. The back seven of this defense is still going to be the biggest question for me, and I wonder how hard they attack that in this draft because they need talent. And you mentioned it. They lost Trayvon Merrick. They lost Robert Spillane at linebacker. They replaced him with a Landon Roberts, but they need to find long-term solutions in the back seven of their defense to really become a playoff contender.
Yeah, I wonder if, Will Johnson, for example, becomes a legitimate target for them at number 6 overall. Is that somebody that they are going to have their eyes on? I know we a lot talk about Action Janty potentially as the landing spot there at number 6, but you're right. I mean, this is a bad cornerback room last season, and that was with Nate Hobbs as their best corner. So now you have Jack Jones, who was really disappointing last season. DeCameron Richardson, who was always going to be a little bit of a risk as a later drafted guy, as a starting player for them. Jacorian Bennett playing the slot for them. You got Eric Stokes, but Eric Stokes himself was a guy who did not live up to his draft selection. So it's a massive risk about what they have in their secondary right now, and I wonder if it really does put Will Johnson on the board for them at number 6. The Kansas City Chiefs, we gave them a B- here. Signed Jalen Moore, 2-year, $30 million deal. Kind of a risky signing given he has not played a lot and he hasn't really proven himself as a starting offensive tackle. But, hey, they need somebody to try to earn one of those offensive tackle spots, so they're giving him a chance to do so. Christian Fulton, Elijah Mitchell. They signed Gardner Minshew as well, signed Robert Tonyan at tight end, brought back Nick Bolton, re-signed Marquise Brown as well. Gave the franchise tag to Trey Smith, but they traded away Joe Thuney. B- here for the Chiefs. What'd you think about this grade?
Yeah, I think the best moves are obviously franchise tagging Trey Smith, and they still have to work out a longer extension with him, and then re-signing Nick Bolton, right? I think it was a major question as whether they could keep both guys or not, or if one would have to walk. And getting Nick Bolton back, who's really the captain of that defense, I think is a big deal, and in the range of the other linebacker contracts that we've seen. I think that's the exact same terms that, say, Jamie and Sherwood got from the Jets. But that's going to be the big question now is the offensive line. Is Jalen Moore a 17-game starter for them at left tackle, especially for as high pressure as it is to play in Kansas City, protecting Patrick Mahomes? And then the left guard spot, we have no idea what's happening there. I mean, is it Kingsley Suamataia? Is it somebody external, somebody in the draft? Do they still make another free agent signing? So the left side of this offensive line is going to be a huge question mark going into next season, and that's going to be at a premium when you're talking about protecting the best quarterback in football, right? So I do think it was a decent offseason. I think when you talk about, again, keeping Bolton and Trey Smith was a huge question for me, and they managed to do it. Now, it cost them Joe Thuney, so that's a big question. He was the best pass-protecting guard in football over the last 4 or 5 years, but I think you can't bash it too much for what they kept. Moore and Fulton, I do like as fits on their team. We'll see if Moore can sustain the bit of success he had filling in for Trent Williams in San Francisco, but it's kind of this thing with Kansas City where I do think they need to nail this draft.
Before we move too far away from that, Walt in the chat was saying that Jacorian Bennett does not play in the slot. He is correct. Jacorian Bennett played over 400 snaps out wide, but who's playing in the slot this year? You tell me, Walt. You got Jack Jones, who played 900 snaps on the outside. Cameron Richardson's not really built for a slot corner. Jacorian Bennett played mostly on the outside, but I feel like he could play in the slot for them. Eric Stokes isn't going to play in the slot. You tell me. Somebody's got to play in the slot. Somebody's got to take over Nate Hobbs' spot. So that was my guess. Curious as to what you think. Los Angeles Chargers, we gave them a B- here. I think Chargers fans might be mad at us for that. I think B- is generous for the Chargers, given what they could have done here. They signed Dante Jackson, signed Najee Harris, signed Mike Williams, Deshaun Hand, Naquan Jones, Benjamin St-Juste. A lot of one-year contracts with those guys. They re-signed Khalil Mack, which I love. I think that's probably carrying a lot of the B- that we had here overall for them. They re-signed Jalen Reagor and Denzel Perryman. I brought back Bradley Bozeman, but I think they were trying to upgrade from Bradley Bozeman in the interior offensive line anyways. I think B- is way too generous for the Los Angeles Chargers. I would be giving them something in the C range, maybe even a C-. I could bump this all the way down to a C-. They had way too much cap space to sort of have the free agency haul that they ended up having. I was really disappointed with the Chargers offseason this week. What do you think?
I don't know that I'm so disappointed. I think there is an opportunity cost thing when you talk about it. It felt like they were a team that was pretty heavy-handed in the DK Metcalf talks, and they didn't end up. I think that's the big one for me, is they didn't end up coming out with a premier wide receiver to go with Ladd McConkey, right? But re-signing Khalil Mack, re-signing Taylor Tart, Denzel Perryman, Elijah Molden. I think keeping those pieces on a defense that vastly improved last year under Jesse Minter, I think is a big deal, right? I think there was some questions as to how many guys could have come back on this defense, right, that were free agency. Obviously, they released Joey Bosa for cap purposes. I completely understand that one. Poona Ford went to the other side of L.A. and the Rams. That one hurts a little bit after having such a good year last year, but I don't think we need to be quite as negative on the Chargers as a lot of fans are right now, because clearly they value keeping the flexibility for the rest of this offseason and into next offseason, right? They're ahead of the curve, right? We have to remember, I know all of a sudden we want them to contend right now, and they have Justin Herbert and Jim Harbaugh, and we want them to contend for Super Bowls. I get it. But there also has to be a patient approach. If you take the approach of blowing it out for one season, using all your resources in 2025 when your team might not be quite ready to make that leap, a Super Bowl type leap, it could hurt you in future years. So I still think, look, they're going to build this thing in a sustainable way that Jim Harbaugh wants to. That's through the draft. That's adding young talent. They're going to find stars in the draft first, and then maybe next offseason they're going to supplement it with whatever's out there available. Because even as we've seen this offseason, there were guys who became available, like a DK Metcalf, who we did not expect to, right? So you never know what you expect, in an offseason on a day-to-day basis, as we've seen over the past week doing all these shows. But I think the Chargers, the conservative approach they've taken here, and all these one-year contracts that they've signed from external free agents, is not the worst thing they could do. It just does it give them a leading chance to win a Super Bowl in 2025? Maybe not, but I think Jim Harbaugh and his approach, you have to trust it after how many programs he's built, right, both in the NFL and in college. You have to trust his process. That's where I would be with that. Again, frustrating that maybe they don't end up with T. Higgins or DK Metcalf or a big-time receiver, but that's not to say they won't draft a receiver or two. That's not to say they won't draft a Colson Loveland at tight end. I think Harbaugh's going to work his process, and he's not going to jump the gun just because everybody around him thinks, hey, this is the year that you could go do it.
Salary cap doesn't, just all of a sudden go away. You're right. If you don't use some of the money that you have for the salary cap, it just means that you will probably have more next season. So it's not to say that they can't make even bigger splash next offseason, but I look at some of just the offensive linemen, especially the interior offensive linemen, some of the wide receivers, although I can't criticize the DK Metcalf move and then say that I wish that the Chargers would have done the same. So I'm not trying to, talk out of two sides of my neck here, but I do think that the Chargers could have done more, especially given what they lost, right? Especially losing Poona Ford. I feel like they could have prioritized keeping Poona Ford, especially the other interior defensive linemen I think were around the NFL that they could have been able to bring in, and they just did not. But again, they probably had their process. They had a number on a lot of these guys. And if the number was a little bit higher, I wonder if, behind the scenes, the Chargers came in second place or third place when it came to bidding for some of these players. So it's not that they're not active, but it is sort of hard for me to look at the free agency money that they had available and how similar their roster is compared to last year. And that's, including losing some guys that I didn't think that they needed to lose, one of which being Poona Ford, and the wide receiver spot just not getting any better for them. So we'll see. How would you feel if in the next week they signed Amari Cooper to something reasonable? Yeah, I mean, that obviously makes it look a lot better. It's hard for me to give them a higher grade here. Like Walt in the chat, when we were talking about cornerbacks, I saw his comment too. He's like, oh, they're going to sign Mike Hilton to play in the slot. Well, they didn't do that yet, so I can't sit here and say that. Now, you know what I would love for the Chargers to do? Go trade for George Pickens, right? Go give something for George Pickens, because I wonder if he is available for, something that is reasonable. I don't know if the Chargers are going to sit here and give like a second-round pick for him, so the Steelers can think that they're just getting a wash of upgrading DK Metcalf and George Pickens there. But if Pickens is on the trading block at all whatsoever, I would love for them to go get him. I feel a little bit better about the offseason in that regard. So, yeah, like we mentioned at the very top of the show, it's not over for any of these teams, but it's hard for me to look at what the Chargers have done, given the possibilities of what could have been this offseason for them, and think that they got better. I think the Broncos got better. I think the Raiders got better. I think the Chiefs are obviously the Chiefs. Did the Chargers get better? No.
Not significantly, no. I mean, again, I think it was good to keep the pieces they had, but there's a long way to go, both in free agency, especially at wide receiver, and in this draft where it figures that, they had a great draft last season. Can I throw one thing back on the George Pickens thing I think about? I personally, I don't think he's getting traded, and I think there's maybe I'm just kind of making up logic here, but right now, you gave up, obviously, the contract as well, but the 52nd overall pick to add DK Metcalf to your team as currently constructed, right? And I know there's everything about the personalities and skill sets and everything that goes into it, but doesn't it – now, they would get whatever they would get back for Pickens, but doesn't it kind of neutralize that if you think about, okay, if they trade Pickens, which I don't think he would get as good a pick as Metcalf got, if you trade Pickens – you've basically spent the 52nd overall pick then to just get whatever marginal upgrade from Pickens to Metcalf, and then Metcalf would be there by himself, right? Wouldn't trading Pickens also put a lot less value on the acquisition of Metcalf? Because then it's just him, and it's really the same thing you had last year.
Well, not if you're getting something in return, because you know that George Pickens is in the last year of his rookie contract, so you're going to have to sign him next offseason, or you're going to lose him for nothing, right?
Okay, so even if it's at least for this year when Pickens still would have been cheap, and depending on what type of pick you would get for Pickens.
With who at quarterback? Well,
that's the problem,
Rodgers,
whether you have them both or not.
On the ball?
I mean, unless...
I don't think DK doesn't make their team better. I just don't like how they went about it. I don't see the whole vision there.
But you could argue if they just turn around and trade Pickens, then Metcalf doesn't make their team better at all. Because then he's just the one guy, the one deep threat out there like it was last year.
Well, now you understand where I'm coming from. How I didn't really love the move. Because I don't know how much better this makes the Steelers with George Pickens on the team or moving on from George Pickens. Because you don't even have the quarterback in place.
I think, with Pickens there.
You're putting the cart before the horse.
With Pickens there, at least for this year, they are better. They are certainly better because you're replacing at that point Van Jefferson or Mike Williams with DK Metcalf. That's a different thing. If you trade Pickens, you're replacing Pickens with Metcalf, and that's marginally not that far ahead, if at all, considering the way Pickens still played really well last year in the role that he played. It's just, you're right. I mean, that's the part where it's confusing is, do they keep both of these guys around long term? Because then you're looking really good. If those are your two guys and you add a slot guy between them that can make things happen after the catch, I think it makes a lot of sense. And of course, again, this is the problem with the quarterback mystery hanging over Pittsburgh. We've gotten off track here with that part of it. But no, I think, again, the Steelers are going to be fascinating. And as far as the Chargers go, keep working the process. I'm not as down on this because I think there's a bigger picture here with the Chargers and Jim Harbaugh.
Hey, I've been wrong about the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'll be wrong again, I suppose. Last division, Los Angeles Rams are at the very top of the NFC West here with an A- grade. You love what the Rams have done this offseason. You had them as one of your highest-graded teams here. They signed Davante Adams. They signed the aforementioned Poona Ford, so he gets to stay in L.A., low moving costs. You love to see that. Signed Coleman Shelton, who wasn't great with Chicago, but he was decent when he was with the Los Angeles Rams. They were able to re-sign Alaric Jackson, Tutu Atwell. They kept Matthew Stafford. They released Cooper Kupp. They traded Jonah Jackson. All in all, we gave him an A- here. What do you think about the Rams?
I think it was fantastic. I think to navigate the Stafford situation and the way that was going, the way that it certainly appeared to be going for a while there, and be able to keep him as a quarterback on a contending team as they were last year, that's a big move. I absolutely love the fact that they got out ahead of the market and kept Alaric Jackson, who's really a breakout player from last year. He was a top 20 tackle in football last year, and he was really the one guy I was looking at in this tackle market who could have been a foundational young piece. I think about a team like New England who could have been very interested in him, and the Rams beat the market and got him a very nice contract. Davante Adams still has a lot left in the tank, especially when it comes to beating man-to-man coverage, and he's going to allow Puka Nacua to do all of the things he can do all around the formation. I think Nacua and Adams both could be in for a big year. Poona Ford's a great signing. Again, I've said it all week. That's a signing meant to beat Philadelphia. You want a big run stopper in the middle. You got a young defensive line. They got mauled twice physically by Philadelphia. Now you're trying to add Ford in there to counter that. And then Shelton, I think you mentioned him. That's really good offensive line depth. A guy who's familiar with the system. You had a day 3 rookie in Bo Limmer starting most of the year at center last year. Could have a competition there for Limmer if he keeps the job and improves. Cool. If Shelton has to step in there as a veteran, cool. But I think the Rams have done everything they've needed to do so far. And now in the draft, I look at them attacking either cornerback or linebacker. I think those are the two positions that could really fill out their defense. Maybe Sean McVay goes fishing for a tight end. There's rumors he wanted Brock Bowers last year. I'm still not completely out on the idea that they could trade up and get one of them, but tight end, linebacker, cornerback, I think are the last clear needs for this team, and a contending team in the NFC at that.
I would agree with those team needs in that draft assessment. Those are the three needs that I would target if I was them in the first round. The Arizona Cardinals, we gave the Cardinals a B, just a straight B here on their free agency week. Big signing was Josh Sweat. They also brought in Akeem Davis-Gaither as well. Signed Dalvin Tomlinson. Jacoby Brissett, they brought him in to back up Kyler Murray there. They were able to re-sign Baron Browning, guard Evan Brown, Zay Jones, LJ Collier, Aaron Brewer as well. Their long snapper. Shout out long snapper. We respect the long snappers here on this show. The splash signing was Josh Sweat, but they also brought in Dalvin Tomlinson. Dalvin Tomlinson coming off of two lower graded years in Cleveland than he had with Minnesota and when he was with the New York Giants. But what did you think about the Cardinals' moves? Really focus on the defensive line. Did they do enough here?
I think it wasn't quite as splashy as I thought, and I thought maybe they would even get into the cornerback market. I think they need some help on the outside there. I do like the Josh Sweat signing. I figured they were going to come away with either Sweat or Milton Williams, especially with the connection with Jonathan Gannon, that Eagles staff, right. And they ended up with Sweat here. I think another one that's interesting to me is the Baron Browning re-signing. He was really good for them, at least as a rotational pass rusher, after they traded for him from Denver last season. I think it was big to keep him. I don't know that he's a starting player, a guy that's going to give you 55, 60-plus snaps a game, but I think as at least a rotational pass rusher, I think Browning really found a place for himself there, and I think it was a nice 2-year contract that he got in the Cardinals, keeping a talented player who just needs to put it all together. Re-signing Evan Brown on the offensive line, started at left guard for him last year, is a good move, and I even like re-signing, or going out, I should say, and signing Jacoby Brissett and upgrading this backup situation that last year, Kyler Murray was mostly healthy last year, but they had, I think it was Desmond Ridder there at one point. There was, Clayton Tune in the last couple of years, just hasn't really been a viable backup option. I think for a guy like Kyler Murray, who has an injury history and runs around and takes a lot of hits, I think having a guy like Jacoby Brissett as his backup was a very good move, a good guy to bring in there.
Chat's letting us know that they brought in Asante Samuel Jr. for a visit, so hopefully they can sign him. I would like that move for them, certainly would. I think that increases the flexibility of what they can do there in the middle of the first round. Would like that signing for them. I think that would be a good one. We gave the Seattle Seahawks a B-. Seahawks, the headliner, was replacing Geno Smith with Sam Darnold, winning the Sam Darnold sweepstakes, gets that quote-unquote Baker Mayfield deal, which is 3 years, around $100 million there. DeMarcus Lawrence, they also signed him, which gives him a pretty beefy defensive line of DeMarcus Lawrence, Byron Murphy II, and Leonard Williams, who's coming off a career year there. They signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling, which is a good connection because Clint Kubiak's now their offensive coordinator, and MVS had a really good year, albeit sort of in a splash second half of the season in Kubiak's system there, so you like that. They signed offensive tackle Josh Jones as well as a backup there, which I like as an insurance policy to Abe Lucas, who, man, when they lost Abe Lucas, it was tough for them at offensive tackle. They re-signed Ernest Jones, re-signed Jaron Reed. They traded DK Metcalf, ended up releasing a handful of players, Roy Robertson Harris, Rayshon Jenkins, George Fant, Draymond Jones, and then Tyler Lockett as well. So we gave him a B- here. What do you think about what the Seahawks have done this offseason?
Yeah, that's fair considering the players that have departed, right? When you think about especially, Geno and Metcalf and Lockett, and it's kind of a real, obviously, emotional time for Seattle fans, but it is not as bad as it looks. I think all things considered, in a vacuum, they've done a nice job. Sam Darnold's got a connection with Clint Kubiak. He knows how to run that system. DeMarcus Lawrence is a really good signing off the edge if he's healthy and he can play in run defense the way that he did back in 2023. Valdez-Scantling, you mentioned the connection with Kubiak as a deep threat. Add him in there. I think he's a nice compliment to Jackson Smith and Jigba in the receiving core. Keeping Ernest Jones is big. That was a big one, too. A young player who played well for them, at least in run defense last year. And I think we have to remember, you get all those guys in the context, too. It's not like for Geno and Metcalf, they got nothing. They got the 52nd and 92nd overall picks. They now have 5 picks in the top 100 in this upcoming draft. There is opportunity. Yes, there's holes on the offensive line inside and at receiver, and I would even argue they could use another tight end. But they have 5 top 100 picks to fill that out with, right? Mm-hmm. We've mentioned a guy like a Jared Wilson at center who would help them a lot. There's multiple guards in day 2, even a Donovan Jackson who would help them a lot. You could throw him right in there as your starting left guard, and I think he would be solid, right? There's always, every year in these drafts, there's receiver depth now, or even if they wanted to go receiver in the first round, a guy like a Luther Burden or a Matt Golden or a Mecca Ibuka, I think all of those guys would help them. There is opportunity here, and a lot of it with 5 top 100 picks to make make this team a lot better and to get Sam Darnold comfortable in Clint Kubiak's system, which really already should be. It's very similar to Kevin O'Connell's. I'm going to have a breakdown on that probably next week, but I don't think the Seahawks are in as bad a place as everybody thinks they are. Maybe could they take a step back this year because of the situation and so much turnover? Sure, but I think they could still build a pretty good football team with the core that they have right now.
Yeah, also, Tevin Jenkins is reported to be visiting them as an offensive line addition. I actually like them taking a flyer on Tevin Jenkins, who I think is a starting caliber
another one too
when he's healthy.
Another one too is that they're apparently at least somewhat in on the bidding for Cooper Kupp as well.
Yeah. So, look, I read off B-, and I can understand, not really addressing the interior offensive line and then having the change at quarterback, so depleted at wide receiver compared to what the roster looked like last year. I get it. I think there's the shock value of understanding where they're at that point, but I would kind of give this a BB+. Again, it's a little bit of, like we talked about with the Saints, this is the direction that they want to go. And in doing so, I think you brought up a great point. They at least got back a second and a third round pick for the guys they were losing. It's not like they lost them for nothing. So they're just kind of turning the page and going a different direction. Now, we'll see how it ends up playing out. If they don't make that interior offensive line a hell of a lot better, I think Sam Darnold's in trouble, especially for 2025. Well, and they got an upgrade receiver as well. So the job is not done here. But I think a B is fair for what the Seahawks are doing, given the fact that very clearly this is just the direction that they want to go here. So interested to see how they continue to build upon this offseason strategy in the draft. I didn't mean for this to be the case, I promise. But the lowest grade we have for any team is the final team that we're talking about here, and it's the San Francisco 49ers. We gave them a D. They released Kyle Juszczyk. They released Javon Hargrave. They released Malik Collins. They released Leonard Floyd. They lost out on Talanoa Hufanga. They moved on from Charvarius Ward. He signed elsewhere as well. Dre Greenlaw, Aaron Banks, all of those players. They traded away Deebo Samuel. They lost Elijah Mitchell in free agency. All of those players are gone. Now they signed Luke Farrell. They signed DeMarcus Lawrence, Mac Jones, Richie Grant, Jason Pinnock, Patrick Taylor. A lot of one-year signings there for the San Francisco 49ers. And it's just very clear that we are turning the page on what was the last 3 or 4 years of this roster while Brock Purdy was on his Mr. Irrelevant contract, knowing that they're going to have to sign him to a contract extension. I can't really, in all fairness, call this a rebuild for the 49ers because they still have Trent Williams. They still have Christian McCaffrey. They still have Brandon Ayuk. They still have Fred Warner. They still have Nick Bosa. They still have George Kittle. Right now, you can't list off all of those superstars and then just say that they're going to be a rebuilding team no matter what. But it is fair to say that it's not going to look the same as it has the last 3 or 4 years for the 49ers. We gave them a D. Is that too harsh, given the reality of where they were about to sign Brock Purdy to his contract? What do you think about the 49ers and what's happened?
If we're looking at this as a matter of using free agency in this period of time to improve your team, then I think it is fair. I mean, all they're doing is losing guys left and right? Greenlaw, Hufanga, Juszczyk, Aaron Banks.
They are severely less talented today than they were a week ago.
For sure. And I think the top end of their roster, the top 8 to 10 players, is still really good, but they've lost a ton of depth over the last few years. I look in the trenches, and I think, look, they need answers on the offensive line, certainly at a couple of spots. They need answers aside from Nick Bosa on the defensive line. I think it's one of the thinnest defensive lines in the entire league. And that's a problem, especially when the last 2 years run defense has become a problem for them, right? So I think what they're doing is they're going to still obviously try to make the postseason. They're going to try to win. They have talent on this team. But I think 2025 is now going to be about structuring the salary cap situation, structuring basically this entire roster around whatever they are going to pay Brock Purdy, right? And who are the long-term pieces here who are going to be here, let's say, if we're looking at now, I think who's going to be on this team in, say, 2028, 3 years from now, right? I think about, okay, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner most likely, but you think about by then, Trent Williams will be at or darn near 40 years old. I think about Christian McCaffrey with the year that he just came off of. How much longer does he really have there? And I know it's been, okay, star running backs have now been getting paid again, and they've been carrying teams, and Saquon and Derrick Henry and these guys, but especially with the injury history and what he went through this year, I don't know how many more years we have of Christian McCaffrey. Can you still build your team around Christian McCaffrey in his early 30s? For most running backs, you sit there and you go, okay, I highly doubt it, right? So they have to figure out how this team is going to be built around Brock Purdy and what that exact number is going to be, because now the next several months are going to be spent figuring out, okay, these negotiations, is he A $40 million quarterback, 45, 50, 55. Where does he fall on that scale, and how can we build the rest of this team around him?
Yeah, I don't think they can get Purdy for $40 million. I think if they're re-signing Brock Purdy, they'd probably re-sign him to $50+ million. I'm not saying that that's necessarily what I would sign him for, but if you're re-signing him early, you're not going to get that big of a bargain on him. And you would probably, if you want to try to sign him for that number, you would have to let him for free agency a year from now. That's what I think. And I don't think the 49ers want to do that. So it'll just be very interesting to see how they go about their team building over the next, I would say, 2 years. Very pivotal 2 years, depending on what that Brock Purdy contract ends up being, and then who else is still there. Like you mentioned, not just 2028, but like 2026, 2027. I think that it's going to be a new-look San Francisco 49ers, so we'll see what John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan can do. I appreciate everybody watching, not just this show, but all of the shows that we have had this week. This has been so much fun, keeping up with all this stuff with you guys, going live a handful of times this week, and just seeing the chat so lively about all the changes that have happened around the NFL. Shout out to everybody who got super chats in this week that we were able to go back and forth with you. That was a lot of fun for us, too. Like we said, the free agency recap and analysis does not stop here with this show and this week. We're going to have these detailed videos for you. So if you are watching the show and you're not subscribed to the channel, please do so you don't miss any of it. We're going to do, again, these data breakdowns, these film breakdowns to show you exactly why we like certain players going to certain teams. It's not just, oh, they had a center, they needed a center. Dalton's going to break down exactly why Drew Dalman's going to be great in Ben Johnson's offense. I'm using that as a cheat code because I know that he's eager to get to that video, and that's one that we're going to have. But that's just a teaser because we're going to have so many of those. And, of course, turning the page to the NFL draft as well. We're updating the team needs. We're going to get to some full draft strategies for a lot of these teams that we hinted at today. So really appreciate just everybody watching all the content that we had here, and we're going to be bringing you some great content in the future as well. For Dalton Wasserman, I'm Trevor Sikkema saying thank you guys so much for watching this edition of the PFF NFL Show. We'll see you guys next time.